I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. Broke my heart.
Godfather 2 coming up next. Welcome back to Nerd is the New Cool. My name is Justin. Today we have a very special guest, and it seems like he's our resident Godfather expert. I would hope you would be okay with that title. So, Mr. Brandon Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you. I am flattered and honored to be back for part two of The Godfather, one of the best trilogies out there, and super excited to jump into this. I am full well and ready to nerd out on this side of it. Glad it's in the name, so hold on to your butts and we'll strap in here and get going.
We got to throw a little Jurassic Park put in there too. And you're right, we are going to get into it. And why are we here to talk about Godfather 2? It's been 50 years since this movie came out. And kind of we go back and look at anniversary films. I don't know, sometimes it surprises me when these big guys come up and I'm like, holy shit, like it has been literally half a century since this movie came out.
Yeah,
Now,
it's insane. And you go back and you look at it and you're like, a lot of these you grow up on and watching them, and they become like the cornerstone of what you build your foundation on for movie appreciation. And I'll kind of get into this a little bit later too, but it's surprising how when you set the question out there of like, what would you change today and who would you cast for who today? That was the hardest part about this entire like review of I- it's really hard to find anybody that at that time or in today's star market who was 30 years old that could pull off what De Niro pulled off.
mhm.
And that's just we are so spoiled. I mean, the 70s and 80s of film, we're so spoiled.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, De Niro, Pacino, and even like the works of Coppola. This is movie making at its finest. And to think about the back-to-back films of the first one and now the second one that we're going to talk about today, those are probably you could argue definitely top 10. I mean, in some lists, top five movies of all time.
Hmm. Absolutely.
This is an interesting question that I always like to start with, which is, do you remember when you first saw this? Because I actually know exactly when I first saw this, not the date, not the year, but I know the circumstance. Do you though?
So I don't remember the exact circumstance or day, but I want to say it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. So it was a little bit ago for me, but I remember watching two pretty quickly after one. So it all kind of made sense. And I didn't intentionally do the gap like what Coppola did with the gap, or the trilogy did with the gap, but it took me a long time to get back around to watching three. But yeah, I mean, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago of seeing this, and there were still so many like impactful scenes that I'm like, oh, I do remember that. Oh yeah, that happened here. So it sticks with you. It just kind of shows like obviously you watch it many times over since then, but that first time you're like, oh yeah, I do remember all those different things that happened throughout this entire saga.
Yeah, well, I can. Here's my story. This is probably, I mean, I'm a lot older than you, so let's call it 20 years ago. I'm just out of college. I'm back on one of the breaks. So it may have been like after I was graduated, but my uncle Jim, who lives, shout out to Uncle Jim. He was staying, him and my aunt and whatever were staying at my parents' house, and I was in town. I was also staying there, or at least there for the night. And he says, "Have you seen The Godfather?" I go, "You know what's funny is that I'm a movie guy and I haven't seen all of The Godfathers. I've seen bits and pieces." And he said, "Well, there's a trilogy or there's going to be a marathon on TNT right now."
Hmm.
I said, "Okay." And it's like 8 p.m. I'm like, "Cool, let's start the first one." He didn't I knew how long they were, but I guess I didn't really think about that, how it stretched out also with commercials and things like that. So I start watching the first one, and of course I'm just riveted. Second one is right after that. Now at this point, it's midnight.
Hmm.
I'm like, well, I got to watch the second one or at least start it. Certainly watch the second one, and now it's 3 in the morning, and I'm like, well, now I'm just staying up all night because the third one's on, and I'm not going to stop now. That doesn't make any.
Right, you can. It would be a catastrophe.
So I did a Godfather marathon, which I'm pretty sure was the second time it ran through because you don't start a marathon at 8. It probably started at like 8 a.m. and now they've gone through for 12 hours and here's it a second time. So I watched it the
Right,
second part of the marathon and absolutely hooked. I couldn't turn away. Now I then went back and watched it later on without commercials and also R-rated without it being edited. But
hmm
there really aren't that many aspects of it that need to be cut out. It's not exactly like a foul whatever type of film that would warrant it being super cut up, right?
right, right.
What makes this movie in particular great? I'll start first with my favorite aspect of this movie, and I'm just going to be very just blunt with it. I love the way that he tells this story with the flashbacks and not in a you've got two parallel stories that are both running linearly, but they are of father and son. And I think it is just a fascinating way to put a movie together. And I certainly hadn't seen anything like that before. And I think that when you start off and you're like, oh, this is going to be about Vito as a child, and then they automatically, as soon as that first scene of his mom and his brother dying and him on the run to America, and then they start same way they started number one with a big old blowout party, and
Right.
oh, they're gonna go back and forth, and I was just like, this is fucking brilliant. What about you?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean the same. It is probably one of the first times we see in film this concept of flashbacks. And now today, it's very, very common to see that and expect it. I think kind of the one that jumps out to me that is like, and this is a TV show, was This Is Us was the one that like caught people so off guard when you start watching that TV sitcom, or not sitcom, but like drama series. You think you're going to follow this linear path, and then the the show is like, hold on a second, we're actually going to go back and then jump around and back and forth and do all these things. And you see all these flashbacks now, and I don't think you see that same thing if part two doesn't do this back in 1974 the way that it did. So again, it's laying the groundwork and foundation for all these other genres to be able to incorporate flashbacks, and you're still doing a great job of continuing the story and continuing the saga that is the Godfather of the original story, but you're seeing all the bits and pieces of what Vito had to do to get up into his ranking, and then once Vito passes the torch off to Michael, then you see Michael run with it and how he goes through his struggles, and his struggles are different than Vito's, and but there's still this like similarity between the two, and even just like the simple transitions that they do, it's so good and so seamless. But the time you're as you're doing it, you're like, man, how did they think to do that? Like, how did they think to line it up just perfectly like this, to where you have this transition where you're like, oh, okay. And even like, again, it's 1974, you don't have all of the special effects to be able to put in all of these different aspects to show the passage of time, or show the, going back in time, that these sets are impeccable and absolutely gorgeous when you go back to Sicily, and when you go back to Little Italy in New York, and then you go to the estate in Nevada. It's all these different pieces and moving parts that are all actually there. They all had to build all of that to be able to portray that, and I think that's a big part of what makes this film great.
Yeah, I mean, you really feel like you're immersed, or at least the characters are immersed in the time period. And like you said, completely seamlessly. Here's a little fun fact about like kind of the flashbacks and just the way the story is told. Because then they all at the end of this movie they do another flashback, but it's not all the way back. It's basically right before Michael essentially goes to war, and kind of like right before Godfather One takes place. In '77, they actually came out with a TV special or TV version called The Godfather Saga, and it was also directed by Coppola but edited by Barry Malkin. And essentially, the idea was it put Godfather One and Godfather Two in chronological order. And so you start with Vito and you see all of Vito's, and you see that flashback of like before he goes to war, and then you essentially see all of Godfather One, and then you see all of Godfather Two with Michael in the present. So, and I should say they also did another version of this in '92, and it was called the Complete Epic Godfather trilogy, and then it pieced together not only one and two, but also the third one, and added in a ton of different deleted scenes. Now, so I'm let's have this conversation now because Jana, my wife, just saw both of these movies back to back for the first time. She'd seen one, parts of two in like film class or whatever, but she'd never seen it all the way through. She had some unique perspectives and thoughts about how maybe she would have pieced together the time period. So I guess question one for you and a two-part question. Would you have wanted to see it kind of in that machete order, right? Like they do with Star Wars, where it's you watch it all the way through in actual chronological order? Or do you think that you would have rather seen, would you be interested in seeing just a movie about Vito?
I think the way that it's set, like I can appreciate what they did with it, but I'm always the guy that like I'll watch it chronologically, whether it's Star Wars or any of the Marvel stuff. I'll watch it chronologically the way that it came out from the way that the
Yeah,
people that put it together like
release
wanted
date.
it to come out. Thank you, release date. I watch it in release date order, and then in that time period, or go back and watch it chronologically in how that in that story in that time frame how it plays out. And there's little differences where you don't get as many of the surprises or the aha moments if you watch it chronologically because you're like, oh yeah, I already knew that that was going to happen. So I can appreciate both, but to your point, I think seeing a movie just about Vito would probably hold stand on its own just as well because you have this entire and like there's even parts when we get into like the book section that there are pieces that are filled in by some of the books and screenplays that Puzo has also put together that they're not expressly explained in the film, but it helps explain a lot about the character of this and, all these little nuances that actually develop the character and make them who they are to where, I feel like sometimes you get this like I don't know, I don't want to shit on the industry now, but like you almost have this stuff where it's like you put all of that onus on the viewer to do their homework and their research beforehand to where it's like if you just lay it out there for them but don't expressly say it, then there's an appreciation for that too. I think of just a Vito prequel movie would be phenomenal, and then leads up to into the Godfather. So I guess it wouldn't be necessarily a prequel, but tells that whole story of just Vito, and then the whole story of Michael's, explanation. But then you can also, again, even with the Godfather Part Two, you see at the end of one, like kind of what he's starting to do and how he's making his moves. But then all of a sudden he's on the estate in Nevada. It's like, well, what else did he had to do to separate out the families? And because there's a whole list of, there's a whole climax that you can get and a whole exposition out of just him divvying up the families and the conflict that could happen there. Because that's what happened in the Family Corleone book is all of these different pieces happened and there were people that were happy with it. There were people that weren't happy with it. There were people that tried to make moves on Vito back then that didn't work out. So I think you have a lot more story that could be told if you have just a Vito and just a Michael film.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the books, right? So, have you read any of them personally?
The Family Corleone, I actually just finished it. So that was one that uh, it had actually come out 12 years ago now. So it came out in 2012. It was based on the screenplay that Puzo put together, but never actually became a film. And man, I wish they would put this into cinematography. But again, it's really hard to find somebody like a De Niro or a Pacino or any of the guys that, I don't know all the names off the top of my head, but like, or a Robert Duvall or
John Cazale, like, I mean, I
yeah,
mean,
any of those guys, like it's hard to find those guys. And I think even if you took the opportunity to do it 10 or 12 years ago, you could have a whole lineup of guys that you could pop right out of The Sopranos and throw them into the 40s or the 30s scene, and they would have killed it. Today, you don't really have that. The guys that you have, they're all in their 50s, so they're all much older. And you kind of can go back and play with, making Luke Skywalker look younger and, Grand Admiral
Ron.
or Moff Tarkin, like, and you kind of do those things, but it just doesn't quite feel right. But man, there's a lot of pieces in that Corleone book that explain Sonny's comeuppance. And I mean, in this book, just to give everyone kind of a frame of reference and spoiler alert on kind of the book, uh, what that follows is it's between Vito and Jenko and Clemenza creating their family. So it takes place after that when you see that sign hanging of the Jenko Olive Oil Company and before the Godfather one starts. So you have where they have all of these. There's five families. They're established, and then there's a falling of the largest family. So then there's this like whole exposition about who's going to take over. The one guy that does take over, he wants to go after Vito immediately. Sonny is doing his own side thing with kind of some Irish mob guys, and they almost run into a bunch of crap. Luca Brazzini, he is just an absolute madman that I like the portrayal that they did of him in The Godfather Part 1, but in The Family Corleone, he is one dude that you do not want to mess with. He is a bad, bad, bad man. And Vito, through kindness and compassion and understanding and just a stronghold, convinces Luca to come over to his side. And as soon as Luca comes over to his side, that's the one piece of the puzzle that Vito needed to build his empire up the way that he does. And then you see Sonny kind of come into the fold because at the time, Sonny, I think, is 17 years old. Tom's 17. He's supposed to be in college. Sonny's supposed to be a mechanic. And Michael and Fredo are in middle school. And Connie's a tiny little girl running around. So it's, 15 years before The Godfather 1 happens. And there's a lot of great pieces that happen in there that set the groundwork for what happened. So uh, Puzo had it all lined out to do, but Ed Falco was actually the guy that took it and ran it with it. And if you don't have time to read it, I will do this shameless plug. The St. Louis County Library has a phenomenal program where it doesn't cost you a dime. You can sign up for the audiobook that is narrated by Bobby Cannavale,
Hmm.
and he has a voice for every single character, and it just takes you away into this whole like world that is the family Corleone. So, because that's how I went through it is I would just pop it in and on any road trip that I would take or out in the market doing whatever I'm doing, pop that in, roll with it, and I was immediately taken away to this whole 1930s
Yeah,
mafioso story.
it takes place in the during the Great Depression, actually, or that's where it starts essentially. Came out May 8th in 2012. So let's work backwards. I'm just gonna rattle off the rest here that are written. The one before that is called The Godfather's Revenge, and that was written by Mark Weingardner. Came out in 2006 November, and this deals with essentially right after Fredo has been killed. It deals with like like Michael loses custody to his children. Michael and Tom Hagen are essentially trying to thwart, this is according to the synopsis, thwart the revenge plans of the former Corleone family, Capo Nick Garaci, who isn't really in the movies.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so this is a different one. Robert Kennedy apparently is like there's a parallel character. Attorney General Danny Shea is the name of the character. And also President Jimmy Shea, which again is supposed to be JFK. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's the one right before that, which again kind of jumps you way ahead in the timeline.
And just for a second, I love that Puzo does this in all of his screenplays, and these guys make these adaptations in the books where it's like, oh no, I'm not talking about that guy. That guy's a completely different name, completely different story. I mean, Johnny Fontaine, you've got uh the labor union guy, Jimmy why am I drawing a blank here?
I don't
That
know. Yeah,
it eludes me. But he puts these guys in there and you know exactly who he's talking about, but he's got the coverage like
Jimmy Hoffa. Okay.
yeah, Jimmy Hoffa. Yeah. So you know all of these things are happening, and they're exactly who they're talking about. But Frank Sinatra was like all upset that The Godfather was supposed to portray Johnny Fontaine was Frank Sinatra, and even Hyman Roth. That was the other one. Uh, he was a real dude, which we'll get into here too. But uh, I just think it's so funny that he's like, you know what you're doing, but you have the backup to say, oh yeah, no, I don't know what you're talking about. This is just a character, totally made up. Fictional.
Totally made up. No parallels there. So the book right before that, it's called The Godfather Returns, and this is also written by Mike Weingardner. Came out in November of 2004. This is actually obviously it's not what is the movie is based on. The movie came out in 74, but I would say this is the closest novel that has anything to do with Godfather 2. Because Godfather 2 isn't really based on a novel.
Hmm.
Godfather 2 is just a screenplay essentially. So this book picks up right after the first novel, and it essentially the idea is that all the characters are being expanded upon. So there's a lot about Fredo, there's a lot about Tom Hagen, a lot about Fontaine, a lot about Nick Garaci, Mickey Shea, Donnie Shea, Francesca Corleone. Like they're introduced into this book. It goes a lot into how the Corleone family is basically legitimized. Talks about kind of goes back with Michael in World War II, Fredo's secret life, and then also how Sonny, Fredo, and Tom Hagen all joined the family, or not the family, but the family business
Hmm.
deals with the death of Clemenza and Tessio. So it's almost like kind of the end of two, beginning of one, some flashbacks, but it doesn't get into the any of the Hyman Roth stuff or anything like that. It kind of takes a different, but a lot of the stuff in the first book, which we'll get again, we're kind of going back in time, um, wasn't really addressed in the film, despite it being a 3 hour movie. They cut out a lot of the first.
It's, which is just insane. It's just insane.
Right. So now the second book is called The Sicilian. This came out in 84. This is kind of the second part of the movie, right? Of Godfather 1. It deals with Corleone Michael coming back from Sicily. He ends the Five Family War. There's a character that comes in called Salvatore, right? So he's in the movie, but kind of comes in this book. And yeah, there's also a little bit about kind of going back and forth about Giuliano's rise from an ordinary Sicilian peasant to a power in Sicily. And so it's kind of them going back and forth. And then finally, the first book where it all started is called The Godfather, came out in 69. And it's about the Corleone family fighting the other four mafia families in New York right after World War II. You see Michael kind of take power, and at the end, so with Vito retired at the conclusion of the war, Michael essentially orchestrates a plan to move to Las Vegas while also trying to eliminate the his rivals in New York. So, like I said, Godfather 1 is almost like two books, and then the next book that wasn't written until 3 decades later kind of tells a little bit of backstory about Michael and also gets into parts of Godfather 2. So there's not a lot to base this movie on based on like original novels back in the day, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
I want to go back and read some of these books, and there's actually one book on here that's not even mentioned, or we haven't mentioned yet, that is um maybe I think the coolest sounding book, which is called The Last Don. I don't know if you've read that or not, but that sounds like a pretty amazing Puzo book.
That was on my list of the next one to read. I haven't, because I'm kind of all over the place here, but availability wise, that was the next one that I could actually like get my hands on quick. Was The Last Dawn, and kind of reading the synopsis of that one sounded
Well, I'll tell you
very
what.
interesting.
Whenever you start it, you let me know, and I'll start it, and then we'll do a pod on it and talk about how awesome it is. Because from all reviews and everything else, it sounds like a pretty fucking amazing book.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's talk Puzo. If we're talking about authors, right? So he is originally known as essentially a crime novelist, focuses on Italian American mafia and Sicilian mafias. Obviously, The Godfather turns into a movie, but he also wrote some other things that people may know him better from. So let me ask you this: how do you know him? Do you know him from Godfather or probably the other thing I'm about to mention?
Uh, I don't remember what the other thing is, but I feel like when you say it, I'm gonna have that moment of like, oh yeah, definitely. Um,
Well, I'll just say it then. He also wrote the screenplays for Superman and Superman 2.
yeah, I, yep. Didn't know him from that, but now I know him from that. But
Well,
Puzo by the name, I know the Godfather, but now I know Superman.
I think almost everyone knows The Godfather, but then you throw out there that he also wrote the screenplay for the first two Supermans with Marlon Brando. Um, there's kind of a fun little parallel there. And to jump from like this Italian mafia, Sicilian mafia, or American mafia, whatever you want to say, the mafia books and novels and screenplays to Superman, like one of the most popular DC characters of all time, it's a giant departure. And the first two Superman movies are fucking incredible. He received the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for both first or Godfather 1 and also Godfather 2, which is pretty incredible. Should we talk Coppola next?
Sure, let's do it.
So I've got kind of like a background on Coppola. Is I don't know if that's worth discussing if you really care. Maybe the audience does care. So let's chat for a second. So he's born in 1939 in Detroit, Michigan. He big time grew up in a huge Italian American family. His father, Carmine Coppola, was a composer and a musician. He actually was the best music for original dramatic score for this movie.
Mhm.
His dad,
Yeah.
which is pretty freaking cool, and also nominated for Godfather Part 3, which we can talk about. We're going to talk about Godfather 3 later on.
In
His
like 16 years.
No, no, no. I mean, like on this
I,
pod,
I
but
know, I know, I know, I know.
greater depth in a few more a few more years. I got a lot of opinions about Godfather 3, as most people do, but mine might be somehow more controversial, but also less controversial. Anyway, more on that later on. His mother, Italia Coppola, um, was an actress, but was only credited for four things. So he graduates from Hofstra, but here's kind of where it's really important to talk about Coppola because his background is important, obviously, family and the Italian, heritage, but he goes to Hofstra, and does graduate work at UCLA in filmmaking. Here are some other people that were doing filmmaking at the same time at UCLA: Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese. That's a fucking is that the Rushmore of directors? At least it's a
That is the Rushmore of directors. Like, what a time to be alive. Could you imagine partying with those guys at UCLA?
yeah, or at least nerding out with those guys. I'm not sure how much partying they were doing. Well, there are some really good documentaries about Spielberg, especially that they were having a good time.
Or were those guys like the weird ones that were like, welcome to my world of all of my stories? And you're like, whoa, man, like, I
Yeah,
don't even know what you're talking about yet. And then,
yeah,
like, 20 years later, you're like, that's what that dude was talking about. Oh, now I know. Like, okay, makes
yeah.
sense.
I,
He
I
was
have a
talking about
feeling
Star Wars.
I have a feeling it was more the latter than the former for sure. Another fun fact is he's Nicolas Cage's uncle. I think a lot of people know that, but just to mention. Big time fan of wine. Obviously started the Coppola vineyards, and we drink some Coppola wine from. They make a really good Cabernet.
Hmm. My wife is a fan of the Coppola wines.
Hmm. He's been nominated a ton of times for Oscars. He was 1971 winner for Best Writing for Patton. This is a what they used to call it was story and screenplay based on factual material, so best adapted screenplay basically. Um, Also won Best Writing for screenplay based on material from another medium for The Godfather Part 1. He won Best Writing for adapted for this movie, Best Director for this movie, and also Best Picture for this movie. So um, I would say his accolades really came from, I mean, Godfather 1 put him on the map for sure. And then Godfather 2 is like, this dude is like perhaps one of the best directors of all time in a matter of
Yes.
essentially 3 years, right?
Yeah, which again, insane.
All right, our two leads. Let's chat about them for a little bit. We got some comparisons for them later on, but I think we'd be remiss not discussing De Niro and Pacino at great length, especially De Niro. We talked about Pacino a lot in Godfather 1 or in the Godfather 1 episode, but we'll get back to him a little bit today. De Niro. When I say Rob De Niro, you may think this movie, and that's a good answer, and we'll just go ahead and say that's the best answer. What else do you think of when or is there another thing you think of when I say Rob De Niro? Maybe it's an age thing, or maybe it's a thing that you especially love, like Rob De Niro. Go.
It's Meet the Fockers. That was my first experience with Robert De Niro was Meet the Fockers as the father-in-law that is far too much to handle to come into play. Um,
Can I just say,
beyond that,
can I just say, I think you forgot we were this is an audio medium, and you did the I'm watching you, fucker. I'm watching
oh,
you, fucker.
sorry.
I appreciate
Yes.
it, but I want everyone to know why there was a gap in a silence for about a few
Right.
seconds.
So my
You were
apologies.
you were going,
Got
I'm
that.
watching you,
I'm
fucker.
watching you, Fokker. I also try to do kind of the
Yeah,
face with, yeah,
yeah,
with his kind of
yeah.
mean mug face. And then the other one would be Goodfellas. He's the right hand man for Ray Liotta in that film with Joe Pesci that kind of extends into the whole mafia universe and appreciate all those films and those type of films that couldn't have happened without what you have of this cornerstone of the Godfather
Yeah.
trilogy.
Yeah, I think that Goodfellas is, or maybe even Casino. That's like the first thing I think
Yeah.
of. Again, that's when I'm in high school. But I mean, clearly this is, I right. I mean, this is one of his first things, but I mean, he's just become like one of the best actors of our time for sure. Starts acting in '65. Mean Streets. Have you seen Mean Streets? Mean Streets will really put him on the map in '73.
No, it's on my list. I know I need to watch that one, but the if you're going where I think you're going, the next one that kind of put him on the map from this one, or Mean Streets put him on the map, but then The Godfather helped, kind of that whole thing. But then just the intro for Taxi Driver
Mhm.
was you knew him as Vito Corleone. Now he is the taxi guy. And it was like, oh, okay. That also is like one of those big helpers to where they're trying to promote their movie of like the ride the coattails of The Godfather too.
Well, yeah, and also just really showed his range because he does that, and he also does Raging Bull, right? Which I
Hmm.
think is maybe, I mean, so he actually won an Academy Award twice. One for this is Best Supporting Actor, but he also won for Raging Bull. He's been nominated 9 times, 3 times for supporting, 5 times for leading, and 1 time for Best Picture because he was like the producer or something. That was for The Irishman a couple years
Mm.
ago. Do you think he looks like the younger version of Marlon Brando?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It could be a quick answer because the answer is yeah, it's fucking amazing casting. And again, like I don't want to like take away from what De Niro is doing. He clearly is trying to do what Marlon Brando was doing in the first movie a little bit with like his like the subtlety of doing more or saying more without how do I say this? Doing more when saying less, right? Much more about facial expressions and more about just kind of the way he moves his body and doesn't say anything. And I think that actually speaks more to whereas if he was actually commented on things. I think about the scene of when he when um Jesus, I just blanked on his name right now. When the first when he goes to go pick up the rug with
Oh,
uh
Clemenza.
with Clemenza, and he's like, "Oh, I must have forgot the key. That's okay, he won't mind." And De Niro or Vito is just kind of looking around and then like kind of stands guard sort of, but is like, "I don't know what I'm doing here." Like I think that he does some of his best acting without saying a freaking word.
So the beautiful thing about, his just not his ability to say more without saying anything at all, just like his mannerisms and his movement, is the chemistry that you see between Carmela and Vito and like that pair scene where it's just like he has all of this that he's carrying on his shoulders that he just was introduced to this big bad guy. He's lost his job. He's got a kid in diapers. He's got another one on the way that, he has all these plans for building his big family, but he carries all of that and yet brings a pair home for his wife to share. And they have that moment where they don't say anything, but all of that is riding on him. And that's what makes Vito Corleone who he is
Mhm.
because he can just carry it all. He can put it all, stuff it all deep down inside, and just you would never even know what's going on inside that man's head.
Uh, I think that's an appropriate time to talk about. Pacino, who certainly plays Michael. I want to say, I mean, a little bit different. He's got his moments where he explodes, but I think he does a good job of like a same thing, like keeping quiet and doing a lot of facial expressions, essentially. Um, so Pacino has. All right, I'll ask you that same question I asked you before about De Niro. Like, what do you think of when I say Al Pacino?
So I'm always torn with this question because obviously he does such a great job with Michael, but the very next one, if not dead even, is Tony Montana as Scarface.
Hmm.
Those are my big two, Pacino, and he's done a whole plethora of other things too, but those are my two big ones. Probably Tony Montana first because I saw that one first. But knowing what I know now, the two of them are just neck and neck for what I think of when you hear Pacino.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong. I mean, I think of also Any Given Sunday, which is a big movie when I was in high school slash college. But yeah, it's definitely Godfather for me. Godfather one. He started his career in 67. I know we've talked a little bit about him, but in 1971, he played a heroin addict in The Panic in Needle Park. And essentially, Coppola saw him at that point and was like, I got to cast this guy. And so he does. And so here are some awards. He's been nominated a lot of times for either Best Supporting or Best Actor. He was nominated for Best Supporting for The Godfather, Best Actor in Serpico, which Serpico is definitely a movie that I think has kind of been lost to time a little bit, but he that movie is incredible. Also nominated for Godfather Part Two, nominated for Dog Day Afternoon. Have you seen Dog Day Afternoon?
Hmm.
Okay, good. Nominated for And Justice for All. Best Supporting again for Dick Tracy. He does a really good job on Dick Tracy. I'm just gonna say it. I like Dick Tracy a lot. Nominated for Glengarry Glen Ross. Also nominated for Supporting for The Irishman. He finally wins Best Actor for Son of a Woman in 1992, which I think that's a little bit controversial. I think he was kind of given that as like a, hey, we probably should have given this to you many, many other times before this, but so now you get it. Not that he's not great in Son of a Woman. I do really enjoy that movie, but um, anyway,
There were better roles.
he was better in a lot of other movies before he finally
Right,
got.
right, right, right.
He won an Emmy for Outstanding Actor in a Limited Series for Angels in America. Did you ever see that in 2004? It was about, it's based on a play. I think there's also a book that goes along with it. It basically AIDS, deals with people that are, in the 80s essentially. Really good miniseries. He also won for You Don't Know Jack in 2010, and he was nominated for Phil Spector in 2013. One more fun fact, because he's going for an EGOT, my friend. He also won a Tony for Best Featured Actor in the play Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie? He also won in 77 for Best Leading Actor in a Play for The Basic Training of Pavlo Hummel. He was nominated for the Merchant of Venice in 2011. So he's got the Emmy, he's got the Oscar, he's got the Tony. We'll see if he can get that
He
Grammy.
got.
I don't know if he's going to get that Grammy. I'm not sure how musically talented our friend Al Pacino is.
Have you heard Joe Pesci's music talent? He
No.
he did a Christmas album, or maybe a Christmas song, but uh, that's worth a listen to. I don't think it's going to win a Grammy, but it's very entertaining.
Well, I hope it does because I think Joe Pesci. Speaking of Italian American actors that are amazing in mafia roles.
Hmm. Maybe not so much as Christmas music, but I don't want to spoil anything for you on that one.
Okay, I'll do some Googling after this.
Hmm.
Finally, to the categories. Summary of this movie, according to IMDb, the early life and career of Vito Corleone in 1920s New York City is portrayed while his son Michael expands and tightens his grip on the family crime syndicate. I think that's actually pretty accurate, pretty basic, simple summary.
Yeah.
It debuted December 18th, 1974 in the US. It has a runtime of 3 hours and 22 minutes. Upon the rewatch, can I ask you, did it feel like it was 3 hours and 22 minutes?
No, the only time I really had a moment where I was like, "Oh man, I feel like this is." Now I realize how long it's actually been. Was after like those transitions, those flashbacks make you stop for a second. You're like, "Oh, okay," and then like going back and like in my head of like like what we were going to talk about was like, oh, I do remember that. I thought that happened before this, but according to my notes, it didn't. Like that was the only time where it was really like set the timeline in place for me where I was like paid attention to time. But outside of that, I mean, there was plenty to keep you drawn in and keep your attention to where it didn't feel like it was that long of a film.
I think, uh, ironically, the times where I felt like it was slow was when we were in the present time with Michael.
Mm,
I think the flashbacks are they go quick, and there's a lot of. I think it's just more interesting to learn about Vito and how he got to where he was than like kind of some of the stuff that's going on with Michael.
yeah,
Personally,
no, I would agree with that.
those were the only times where I'm like, okay, we're kind of moving a little slow. Really, kind of the middle part of when they're in Cuba and kind of dealing with some of that stuff. But other than that, like, no, it didn't. I mean, 3 hours is a long fucking movie, and it did not feel like through over 3 hours long
Yeah.
by any person. Estimated budget of 13 million. It grossed worldwide close to $48 million, which is pretty good. That's almost four times as much. Let's talk awards because it won a lot of awards. It won Best Picture. It actually became the first movie to win Best Picture that was a sequel. Robert De Niro was the winner of Best Actor in a Supporting Role. He did not come to the awards ceremony though, and Coppola accepted the award on his behalf. It was the winner of Best Director, Francis Ford Coppola, winner of Best Writing, Adapted Screenplay by Coppola. It also won the Best Art Direction Set Decoration. A couple people that got that. Um, Won Best Music. We already mentioned that. Original Dramatic Score. Again, Coppola's dad, Carmine Coppola. Pacino was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. Michael Gazzo was nominated for Actor in a Supporting Role. Lee Strasberg was nominated for Oscar in a Supporting Role. I mean, that's a lot of people from one movie to be nominated. I mean, was that
That
four?
that that award show is just like the Godfather theme just played the entire night.
Yeah.
That's all
I
that
mean,
happened.
there's four nominees for Best Supporting Actors, all from the same movie. That's nuts. Talia Shire was nominated for Best Actress in a Supporting Role, and then Theodora von Runkel was nominated for Best Costume Design. So yeah, there was a lot of awards going on, or at least nominations for sure. BS rankings, Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 96%, audience score 97%, and IMDb gives it a 9.0. Those numbers aren't shocking. IMDb is always the worst. The Spielberg Award for directing, we already kind of have spoken about Coppola a lot, but he actually didn't enjoy directing the first Godfather, and um, he asked the studio to pick a different director for the sequel, and he wanted to be the producer. Obviously, he asked Scorsese, his buddy, but the film executives rejected this, and so Coppola essentially said, "I'll do it, but with a few conditions." And I'm glad he did, right? I mean, I don't know how you can replace Coppola in this situation. Here are some of the conditions. Telling him, hold on a second. All
While
right,
you're
sorry.
going down there,
Go ahead. Yeah.
shame on Paramount for everything that they put Marlon Brando through and Francis Coppola, like all of these guys, like I don't think they would have done what they did if they knew the success and the projectile that would have happened from that. But just reading about like even that last scene of that flashback scene, that was supposed to get the whole gang back together. And Brandon was like, I'm out. I'm done. I don't want to deal with these guys. And it's like, what the hell is wrong with you? What did you do to that man that he didn't want to be a part of what is one of the greatest trilogies and best sequels that, there's even that argument for, is it better than the original? Like, I don't want to put too much pressure on you guys as a podcast, but shame on Paramount for doing that back in 1974 or
I mean,
72.
you could argue the same thing happens later on with Tom Hagen, right? Like, I mean, not bringing back Robert Duvall in the third one
Oh, yeah.
because of like a minor little like agreement about money, and they essentially have to rewrite the entire storyline. It's like that doesn't make any sense. Pretty
Yeah.
pretty. So
Sorry,
Coppola
continue.
essentially No, I was gonna say, so Coppola essentially asks, he says, I want to tell parallel stories featuring flashbacks into Vito Corleone's early life, and they agreed. He also says he also demanded he get paid $1 million, which he asked for as a bluff, thinking they would not take it. And then they did. And just in terms of inflation, like $1 million then was is just a little bit over $5 million now. So pretty good salary. We've talked a lot about Coppola. Let's talk about him for one more quick second. The Tarantino Award for writing. He wrote the screenplay, or Coppola did. Puzo's also involved. Um, so again, though it claims to be based on the novel by Puzo, only the scenes about the young Vito Corleone have any basis in the book. We already mentioned this. Like, there's a little bit about that goes back and talks about his youth and young adulthood. Everything dealing with Pacino's or like Michael's character in the future has nothing to do with it with the novel. It's all strictly for the film. Okay, now we get to argue a little bit. Finally, some categories where we can discuss Tom Hanks Best Leading Role Award. We got Pacino plays Michael, De Niro plays Vito. Fun fact, real quick before we argue: De Niro actually auditioned to play Sonny in the original Godfather, and it was rejected, which is really funny. That's a fun little butterfly effect if he gets that if he gets that role.
Right, because then you don't have him playing young Vito. You've got him in a flashback in a small little piece.
Yeah, and can you imagine James Caan playing a young Vito? Doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Who do you got? Pacino, De Niro. You are awarding the best supporting actor role today for the Oscars. Who are you giving it to?
I have to give it to De Niro because the portrayal that he had of young Vito, again, it is just well, see, that's yes, no, I'm not going to change my mind. I'm going to stick to it. It's Vito because of the portrayal that you have of this man that has all of these hardships that he has to endure. Not only is he an immigrant, but he has to get into this mindset of I'm an immigrant, I'm coming over, I have literally no family, I'm starting anew, and you don't even speak but what I think 7 words of English in
Mhm.
the entire film. So he may already have known a little bit of Italian, but you have to talk in this Sicilian dialect that goes uh into detail later, like, and you have to, play this big bad guy, you have to show this compassion. I mean, there's just a whole range of emotions to where for Al Pacino as Michael, it's not that he's a one-sided character, it's that he is just trying so hard to live in his father's footsteps, make the family business not only continue, but grow and fail at it. So you have this whole exposition of, I have all these big plans and it doesn't work, and everybody is rooting against me, to where it's almost like he's just this. He starts out as this like quiet and like trying to be the guy that is doing what's right for his family, but by the end of it, you're like, you didn't you didn't do it. You didn't succeed. You failed. You failed at everything. So I think but that's also a hard role to play too. But I'm gonna go with De Niro as Vito Corleone's best leading role.
I mean, I 100% agree with you. I just want to add on to it because you're right. It also it's hard almost to be Michael becomes a very unsympathetic character because you see him go from good to bad basically, and you see Vito, even though he becomes bad, quote unquote, he's almost like the anti-hero, and so you're kind of rooting for him to be
Hmm.
successful in this underworld, whereas you're kind of rooting against Michael a little bit, at least by the end. Like, um, you see his like as he like essentially circles the drain, and you're seeing Vito kind of do the opposite. And I think what's interesting about De Niro too is that you got to remember he's not just trying to play Vito and like you already mentioned the background and all that kind of stuff and Italian and whatnot, but he's also trying to play Vito as a young Marlon Brando would play Vito.
Yeah.
Like, he's also acting like Marlon Brando, so he's almost like acting like two different characters, right? So he's acting like how another actor portrayed that role years before that. So you got to give it to him. This one's a little bit harder. A lot more nominees. The other four Jacksons, so these are secondary characters. There are a lot of secondary characters, and we could probably add more on here, but let's just go with these. Robert Duvall plays Tom Hagen. I, I don't know if we have to talk about his filmography because he's been in so many things, but a couple things I threw out. I threw out some of my favorites from Duvall. Civil Action, Gone in 60 Seconds, Deep Impact. I love him in Days of Thunder, and I think Apocalypse Now is probably like his big giant role. Other than this, Diane Keaton plays Kay, who has been in a ton of things. Annie Hall, Something's Got to Give. John Cazale plays Fredo Corleone. We know him from The Godfathers, also Dog Day Afternoon, also Deer Hunter. This guy has only been in was only in eight things because sadly he died of lung cancer at 42. But I mean, what a hell of a filmography if you've got eight things, two Godfathers, Dog Day Afternoon, Deer Hunter, and The Conversation, which is also nominated for Oscar. Like that's fucking murder. I mean, that's crazy how many amazing things he was in. Talia Shire plays Connie Corleone. We know her for the most part from Rocky. She was only paid $1,500 for playing Connie in the first movie. She received $30,000 with a 10,000 bonus when the box office receipts hit 27.5 million. So at least she got paid a little bit more. But I mean, sadly, that's just what it was like.
Yeah.
Lee Strasberg plays Hyman Roth. He was nominated again for Best Supporting Actor. He only has 10 credits though. And Michael Gaza also nominated. He plays Frankie Pentangeli, has 69 credits, pretty much a bad guy in all of them, including
Yeah.
Sudden Impact and one of my favorites, Last Action Hero. He's the evil boss in Last Action Hero. All right. So since you went first on that last question, I suppose I'll go first in this one. I think Michael Gaza is fucking awesome. When he's on screen, I am like unbelievably riveted, and I wish I had known him. I wish he was introduced in the first movie. I know he's a kind of a made up character for the second one, but would have been like to see him. Nice to see him a couple years back when Vito was around. Um, but I think he's great, and he just plays it so well. He just plays super confused and pissed off, and really leans into it and like kind of goes for it. So that's my vote.
I'm surprised you did not say Diane Keaton is gay.
No, I don't like Diane Keaton. Period.
I, I hate Kay. Oh, I hate Kay.
Kay's the
Oh,
worst.
she's
Okay,
the
that was
worst.
sarcasm. Kay's the worst character in both movies. All three.
Ah, golly. This is a tough one for me because I think, again, to your point, Pentangeli, you almost just write him off in the first 5 minutes of like this guy that's just like waiting to talk to him, and you're like, this guy's just annoying, but he becomes this whole major part of the show that like you're like, it's maybe it is him, maybe it's not him. What is going on with this guy? He's annoying, he's drunk, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Holy crap, he is. Oh, but he's honorable at the end. Like, just all these emotions go on with him. But then you also have Tom, and I am so sympathetic towards Tom. And you have this beautiful moment between Tom and Michael where it shows Michael's cunning, it shows Tom's compassion when they sit down, and Michael is like, Tom, this is why I didn't want you in on all of this because people are very easily swayed and they're all businessmen. You have to think like businessmen. And Tom is like, I've always wanted you to think of me like a brother. And that moment, it's just like it just punches you in the heart where you're like, oh, Tom has been on the outside. He is an Irish descendant that is in the mafia, but he's never quite in the mafia. He's never quite in. He's just exonerated as consigliere at the end of the film. And you're just like, why? Why? He's your brother. What are you talking about? And again, going back to the family Corleone, you have this whole story about how I know I'm not playing fair here, but the story about how Tom comes into the family is explained in the family Corleone.
Mhm.
And Sonny and Tom's connection between that whole film, but in that whole novel, is fantastic. To where you have this big buildup, and then Tom is basically the last elder of the Corleone family that knew about the business that Michael was able to learn from, and then just to have him ousted and then brought back in. So that's what I all of my background that I add into Tom's character, even though he doesn't have that much, in the actual film, which is why I say I'm playing it unfairly, but my vote would be for Tom Hagen,
Yeah,
Robert Duvall,
actually, he's German Irish.
or German Irish.
Okay, my crap McFriend. Um, yeah, so let's just settle on John Cazale then, since we can't decide. And Fredo needs to get he needs to get some comeuppance there. No, I agree with you. Duvall's pretty awesome. Honestly, you could give it to almost any one of these people except for Diane Keaton, only because Kay is the worst character, and she plays it really well. I do not like Kay. Backup singers, so these are some pretty deep cut characters. We got Bruno Kirby, who plays the young Clemenza. Now, when I was watching this, I said to Jan, I said, "Hey, what do you know him from?" And she's like, I know him. I can't think of where I know him from. I know him from City Slickers, and he's also from When Harry Met Sally, Basketball Diaries, and Good Morning Vietnam. Another unfortunate, he passed away of leukemia way too young, but he was in a ton of stuff when I like in the late 80s and early 90s. Harry Dean Stanton plays FBI man number one. You may know him from The Green Mile, or actually, most people know him as Brett. He's one of the main characters from Alien,
Mm.
like one of the I can't remember his actual role. His name's Brett. I think he might be the first person who dies, honestly, from the xenomorph. Danny Aiello plays Tony Rosato. Danny Aiello's been in a lot of things. He plays in from Do the Right Thing, Hudson Hawk, Moonstruck are the big ones. Roman Coppola plays Sonny Corleone as a boy, so the young kid. So obviously that's Francis Ford Coppola's kid, and then Sofia Coppola, who we learn or who we get to meet more later on in Godfather 3, plays quote child on ship. I don't know if you have any other ones. Those are the nominees I got.
Um, the only other one I would have said or thrown out there would have been that their time was shortened, would have been one of the other Dons.
Hmm.
Chi or Fanucci.
Yeah.
Probably Fanucci just because of his reign that he had over kind of um, the Little Italy part of it. But I mean, it's still, good list of folks.
Well, who are you picking?
For this one, I will go with young Clemenza just because of the unexpected like comedy that you get from him right away. To where it again, you have another guy that's trying to play. You got a dude playing a dude described as another dude. That whole thing. Um, but that one was just he has this like kind of lightheartedness comedy where you kind of like are enthralled with him when he starting to see him get this relationship built with Vito, and then you see this like, but don't mess with me because I will eliminate you, where that guy just is knocking on the door, and had that guy open the door, Clemenza, boom, gone, dead, and wouldn't even have thought twice about it. So Bruno Kirby is my selection for that one.
I agree. I fucking love Bruno Kirby. I think he's amazing in City Slickers and When Harry Met Sally, two of my favorites. I mean, he's good in the other movies he's been in as well, but he's certainly for me the most recognizable character that isn't like one of the main ones.
Yeah,
Yeah, does an amazing job of it, and kind of kind of hard to vote against Bruno Kirby in my opinion. So the next category we get into well, we get into music. The John Williams category for music. We already mentioned Coppola, Nino Rota also was part of this. So they have 187 composing credits. Also composed part one. Tons of musicals from other films in Italy. Again, won the Oscar for. So I think they co-composed it. Coppola's dad, and then Nino Rota, and Nino Rota did like the first one, and the second one. I think Coppola did the second one and the third one, I believe. Anyway, um, okay. Let's get into the scenes that are out. There are a lot of good scenes. I don't know how you want to. I don't want to read every single scene, but I'm just going to read the ones that I think um, stand out, and we'll pick our favorite.
sure.
So, and I definitely a lot of these are like the entire flashback. I guess is kind of like a scene, sort of. Um, so, for example, like the first scene I have is the flashback to Vito getting introduced, and dad's dead, brother gets killed, and then mother gets seemingly fucking blasted by a shotgun 20 feet. I said to Jan, I go, she had to have been on like a freaking like a rope and they just yanked her, right?
Right. And you see that same thing happen to the Janko olive oil guy that was shooting for Vito when he was running back to the car when they come back at the end, where it's like there's no way that somebody would fall like that. But again, they didn't know what they were doing. They were trying to, I mean, not that they didn't know what they were doing, but they were trying to make a portrayal of how someone would be affected to be getting shot, but then just
He
exponentially added to it.
well, and his like legs come out from behind underneath him and like his legs go
Yeah, and he
back.
immediately falls back. Yeah,
Yeah.
or falls
Uh,
down.
but mom gets blasted. Uh, scene I have is I just wrote down Michaels and Reno making deals, and kind of like the whole part. It's basically the whole opening baptism or not baptism, the whole opening communion,
Yeah, communion.
and it ends. It kind of ends with the drapes being open and Michael dropping down after Kay says, "Why are the drapes open?" So I had that as one big scene. I mean, there's some good parts within there that are like I really like the confrontation with the senator. That's obviously pivotal to later on. Then we go back in time again. So we got Vito in 1917 New York. A lot of characters are introduced here. So we have Benucci introduced at the play. Clemenza is obviously introduced. We already mentioned uh, Jenko, who's the son of the shop owner. By the way, he also plays Frankie Carbone in Goodfellas. I don't know if you recognized him from
I
Goodfellas.
did. I did. I recognize those eyebrows anywhere.
I could have put him on like deep cut characters, but I just wanted to mention it here.
Yep.
The next scene I had, because again, you've got some characters that come back from the first one, and also it's actually very reminiscent of when um, uh, Luca Brasi gets killed. It's when Frankie they attempt to assassinate
Yeah.
Pantangelo, but they fail miserably. And Jana actually said out loud, which I thought was really funny. She said, "Oh, finally, it doesn't. Everything doesn't always go as like according to plan." Like, yeah, that's true. It
That
did.
is true.
We had just watched the first one, so it was like, yeah, it did seem kind of easy to kill the heads of all four mafia families, and Mo Green also, just like that.
Just like that. They were easy targets for being the head of mafia
Yeah,
families.
yeah. Next scene I've got is Hagen fixes the senator's problems. We already mentioned the senator, but having to
Yep.
deal with the murdered, I'm assuming, prostitute, which Janice said that sucks. She had to go that way. Seems kind of like she was obviously a pawn in the game of the Corleone family.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they definitely they duped Senator Geary.
Hmm. The next scene I kind of added all one. I just put in Cuba, and so you've got.
There's so much that goes on in
I
Cuba.
know there is, but that's I think this is the most. I mean, spoiler alert. This is not going to be my favorite scene. This is the most boring part. I get that you need to have all this happen, but I almost think they should have chopped this up a little bit. But you've got Michael dealing with Hyman Roth. He's dying back and forth. Fredo shows up. They go to the dinner. You find out that it was Fredo, and then it culminates in I know it was you, Fredo, like because he learned that he did in fact know Johnny from before.
Hola.
Then the next scene is Vito. And I think this is where this is where we go to intermission. I think this is where
Yeah.
intermission pops up.
Hmm.
So this is halfway through the movie. uh, but it's actually not. We'll get to that later on. It's a weird place to take an intermission. I get it's where the intermission is for the story, but it's definitely certainly not for the time. We have Vito going back in time again. Uh, Finucci, he kills Finucci. Basically, Vito becomes the man now. We go back to the present. Michael asking, what was Vito like, and in his heart, essentially. Then we go back in time again. Vito, he's taking requests again, a little bit parallel from Godfather one, taking requests like, how can I help you? Like, not it's not his obviously it's not his daughter's wedding day, but he's kind of working with the people
Yeah,
that are.
he's in the Janko olive oil shop and,
Yeah,
how can what can I do to help?
yeah. I don't know if these are my favorite scenes. These are just some good scenes. So we got Michael's trial. That's pretty good.
Hmm.
You got, and I do love Pantangelo in that. I think he's amazing. Like all of a sudden acts like I don't know what's going.
Oh, well, I'm
I was all confused. I don't know. Who knows?
smoking a cigar.
Yeah.
Congressional hearing, whatever.
A really important scene is like next the conversation with Fredo. Like the Michael speaks to Fredo
In
and
the boathouse, yes.
heart to heart.
That
Michael,
just kills you.
it's tough when you know what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Next part that I get why it's in there, but I don't really like this scene. I will say it's the first time we see like what becomes vintage Al Pacino, which is yelling very loud and out of nowhere, which is when Kay and Michael have the confrontation about Kay getting an abortion. I think this is our last flashback to Vito. Vito goes to Sicily and kills Don Ciccio. This is for Andolini and fucking knife in the fucking stomach and right across. All
Love
right.
the I love the death scene there too.
Hmm.
The acting of being gutted. Yes.
Okay. So to wrap this up, we flashback to the present time. Connie and Michael have their conversation. Frankie is in prison and eventually dies. We wrap up all family business similar to the first one where Roth, Frankie, and Fredo are all killed. And I put on there the last scene of the movie, which is the flashback with Sonny. So, as you mentioned, Marlon Brando was scheduled to return, and he was actually going to cameo in this, but he hated the way he was treated, and Coppola had to rewrite the scene without Vito, and it actually filmed the very next day. So, like up until I think the day it was going to film, Brando was in, and then he decided to say "fuck you" to Paramount. And then James Caan, speaking of another person who tried to, I guess, maybe get out of it or whatnot, he asked that he be paid the same amount of money to play Sonny in this flashback as he got paid to play the entire movie in Godfather 1. And guess what? He got his wish.
I
I
mean,
think that's awesome.
good on them, but also like what he said stupid like four times.
Mm. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Okay. I I have a favorite. Is there any scene you want to talk about or you want to pick out as your favorite first?
The only thing I want to run down is just a few things like scene wise that I just had some comments on before we kind of run through all of it. The Ellis Island immigration scene, I connected with that scene because my great grandfather had almost an identical experience. Not that they read the tag, but my last name should not be Dennis. It should be Tennis. So the
Mm.
guy grabbed his tag, and that's what actually saved Vito's life because Ciccio would have found him if he would have been Vito Andolini if all of that would have happened. But they grabbed his tag and he's like, "Oh, Corleone. He's Vito Corleone." And they wrote his name down. My great grandfather was German, came over before World War II. And at Ellis Island, he had such a thick accent that he goes, "What's your first name?" And they said, "Antoine or Anton." And they said, "What's your last name?" And he said, "Tennis." And they wrote down Dennis, Dennis. So seeing that, I was like, oh wow, that's the only thing I have to associate of like what it actually was like back then. And I mean, he's a kid; he's got nobody else with him. I think my great grandfather actually had his wife with him and one daughter when he came over, and then had a second daughter here, and then my grandfather eventually. But that whole scene was beautifully written and portrayed of what it was actually like through that time frame. Um,
Oh, and let me add to that too, because my family is Sicilian, and guess what? My great great grandfather, um, when they came over, their last name is actually Della Sola, which means of the island. So there you go.
everybody can connect on that. It's funny how there's always like some connection between all of these things. Everybody's a little different.
Yep.
They have that connection back to it.
Well,
Uh, the mention of Mike, or the first scene where you see Michael's estate with the party, just the connection of like he's trying to do exactly what Vito Corleone did at the beginning of Godfather Part One, where he has this big party, but it's not a wedding, so he doesn't have to grant favors, but he's just having business meetings, and even apologizes to Kay about it. And oh, I'm so sorry that I have all these meetings. He knew what he was doing. He's trying to build the business up, and it's never going to be legitimized in Kay's eyes. The scene with Merle and Connie was so uncomfortable. I was so uncomfortable watching that scene because the dude is sitting right there and Michael just doesn't even address him. He talks to Connie and he's like, I don't want I don't want you to have anything to do with this man. I don't know who he is. I don't know what his business is. To to where he's trying so hard to be Vito and be her father, but he can't quite do it right. And she's like, I ran out of money. Michael, I need money. And it's
Says,
like,
"I need money, Michael," and he doesn't even look at her. He looks right at him and like rolls his eyes. like,
right, right.
like
It's just
fucking
like
guy.
it's like you're not her dad, you're her brother. Come on, man. Like I know you're the head of the family, but like also like if I'm Merle, I'm not gonna sit in that meeting and not say anything. Just be like, oh
No,
well,
he no, he just as soon as Michael looks at him, he just looks down like,
yeah.
yeah, no, I'm a piece of shit. Yeah.
So at that point, I'm like, yeah, Michael, you know what? You're right. But also, you're a dick. Merle's a dick. Everybody just stop being dicks. Like Connie, go find a good man. Like it's not that hard. Go find a
Connie,
good working man.
it's one A and one B between who sucks worse in this movie, Kay or Connie. They both are
Ah.
bad.
And poor Carmela, she's like, you haven't even seen your sons yet, and the first thing you say is you want to see Michael for money. Ah, am I wrong? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, the mom's great.
oh,
And
love her.
flashback mom is great as well.
hmm hmm let's see. Oh, one thing I did want to point out. I know in the first film we talked a lot about drinking. Right away, I noticed anytime Michael's doing any meetings throughout the entire film, he is not drinking at all. He has a clear head. He's drinking water, he's drinking club soda. There is one time where he puts his guard down where he doesn't know Fredo is the one, but he's suspicious, where he has a drink with Fredo, but outside of that, he does not drink. So that's a big contrast to what Vito would do. What Vito was always like, bring out the scotch, make everybody comfortable in the room. No, when Michael's doing business, he has a clear head, he has a clear mind, he knows exactly what he wants to do, and everybody knows exactly what's going to happen because he's not drinking at all. So that was just one thing that like kind of transpired over all of the scenes with him. Kay in the I don't know if they were in the parlor or if they were outside where she's questioning the legitimacy of the business. I think they were slow dancing at the communion, which
Yeah.
was just, foreshadowing for that, where I know that they had to give it to Kay, but it was still a good scene of like foreshadowing and portrayal of that, and then her like thing with the drapes, so you already got that part of it. Uh, but that scene with Tom and Michael, I'll go back to it again. I always wanted you to think of me as a brother, Michael. I'm touched. It was just like, Tom, you're back in it. And then Tom becomes the Don. His wish is granted, and it's so I I don't even know if he had enough time to appreciate what was even going on. But Michael was like, "You're gonna be the Don now. I gotta go take care of some business." Boom, down, down, boom, and it just was like it happened. To where for Tom, he's been building up towards this his entire life of like, I'm working under Vito, I want to be the, consigliere. I finally get that, then it's ripped away from him, then he is surpasses consigliere and then goes right into being the Don. It's just like, what a cool moment for Tom. So I liked that interaction with them.
That does end, and that's actually I think that's the last part of that scene. That's past the drapes. It's when they find the guys in the sewers or whatever, and he's like, "What should we do with them?" Well, ask Michael. He goes, "Rocco, do what I said," and just walks off like in his robe, like I'm fucking in charge. And they're like, "Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
you
He
fell right into that
he
role."
he fell right into that role. He knew exactly what to do. The scene where Fanucci comes into the grocery store and again, you kind of said this whole like expansion of the first flashback, or I guess the second flashback at this point of Fanucci taking over, and you're saying, man, what a prick. And Vito, his only like he's not mad, he's just a little off put by it. He sees what he does to Janko's girl, he sees what he does to Janko's girl's father, the store that Janko's dad or Janko's girlfriend's father, and then what he does to Janko's father. He's not mad about it. He doesn't like lash out to where I feel like if you're in that if you recreate that same scene with Michael or even Sonny, because Sonny was even worse. Sonny immediately would have been like, I'm killing this man right now. Vito's like, okay, your uppance will come, but not yet.
Well, not only does he play it cool, he thanks his dad for treating him like a son, and then his dad tries to give him this basket of all this food, and he's like, "No, no, I can't do it. I will not take it." And you're like, "Man, the honor of this fucking this guy." Like I know
It
he's
just makes you love him so much more.
that's the thing is like that's why I liked it. I think anti-hero is a really good way to describe like Vito because he's not a good person from like a morality standpoint, or maybe he is, I guess, but he has no qualms with like committing crimes and maybe doing what's best for his family, but he's not like a cold-blooded killer. Maybe he is, but it seems. But I'm
But he's an
sympathetic
honorable. They just do such a
with
good job of making you like, yeah, I knew he killed a guy, but
well, listen,
he's also such a cool dude. Like I can't hate him. You can't hate the guy. You can't hate the guy. He's literally the best.
his logic
Uh,
makes sense, and I'm all for it.
right, right. The pair scene with Carmela and Vito, I just thought was so touching where he's got all of this stuff on his shoulders. He literally, the one thing he could think about of, he lost his job. He's got to go home to Santiago as a baby and his wife, but he gets her a little gift and and she sees it. She immediately knows, oh, this is a special occasion. We've got a pair. Oh, this is great. Let's split it. And they share it and they have that moment before the conversation of, hey, I got fired. Things are gonna be a little tight. Like, as an adult what's coming. But Vito's like, I'm going to delay that just a little bit because I love my wife, I love my son. We're just going to enjoy this last moment beforehand. And if I were in that same role, I would do the same thing. I would do the exact same thing where I'm like, life is gonna suck really, really bad for a while.
Right.
So let's delay the inevitable for just one night and then we'll tackle all the problems tomorrow. So I like that scene.
We get to see a lot more of that with Vito, and we see the opposite parallel with Michael, in that
Hmm.
he doesn't seem to be very connected with his children. There's a little bit of that, I guess, after the shooting of the curtains and the windows, and he goes and speaks to his son, but for the most part, he's almost seems like an absentee father. And what's maybe unfair to Michael is he is doing what's best for the family in his mind, and he is trying to do things that will legitimize the family. But he was put in this situation, obviously, from Godfather One, that he was the only one that could save the family, essentially. But he almost becomes the worst version of himself. Whereas when you see Michael, or I'm sorry, when you see Vito become this Don, like you said, it almost seems like he has this like higher code of honor. Um,
Yeah.
and then you get to see these soft moments with his wife and with his children and Fredo having, pneumonia and moments like that where you're like, oh, like he's just a normal guy, I guess, that is kind of just making the best of a really shitty situation where his whole family was killed when he was like 7, and got thrown on a boat to send to America. And it's like, it's almost like you're like this is a good old fashioned American rags to riches story. And then you got Michael, where it's like, well, he came from a family of wealth, and he's still cleaning up the mess, but kind of gets the short end of the stick, I guess.
Yeah. And to that point where even though he has that kind of heart to heart with Anthony, it's ripped right away when he goes away forever and Anthony's like, "Oh, can I come with you?" He's like, "No, no, you can't." And then, he misses Christmas, he misses New Year's, he's gone the entire time. And he comes back in and the only thing he says to Tom about his kids is he's like, "Well, what did you get them so I know?"
Yeah,
That just it completely killed it for me where it's like, Michael, what are you becoming? Like you don't even like you're so obsessed with Kay having another boy, but the son that you have right in front of you, you're not there for, you're not present for. And I was just like, man, Michael, you're going down a path. I don't like the path you're going down.
yeah.
Um, the other scene that I thought was important and worth mentioning was the scene where he goes back to New York and is in Pentangeli's, basically the Corleone estate, and he does that part where he quotes, which I don't know if this is the first time that we hear this quote in cinema, but he makes that quote where my father taught me a lot of things in this room, or a lot of things in this estate, but the one thing he taught me in this room is to keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. I was like, Man, that's a great line. It's a great line. And at that point, you still don't know. Was it Patanjali? Was it Roth? Was it the Rosado brothers taking revenge? You know, what, where, who made the hit on him? But just having that scene in there was great. I'll go into the cake cutting scene in Cuba later on when we kind of talk about some other stuff. But you had already brought up the mention of Fredo and, him just not paying attention. I know he's drinking, but it's like Fredo. 2 seconds ago, you just pretended like you didn't know who Johnny Ola was, and then you take him to the Superman show, and you're so distracted by this man schlong that you're just like, "Oh yeah, Johnny took me to this thing." And Michael, and then your heart breaks for Michael because Michael's like, "My God, my brother put the hit out on me." Spoiler alert, everyone, if you haven't watched the movie.
Hmm.
But Michael's just heartbroken, and Fredo's just like, "Oh, yeah, look at that guy schlong." Yeah, Johnny Ola used to take me over here all the time when I would visit Cuba. That was the part where I was just like, "Man, damn it, Fredo, you just don't get it. You don't get it." For me
So,
personally, again, love the moments with young Tessio, young Clemenza, young Jenko, and young Vito, where you start to see them start to put this family together and start to put this business together when they hang that Jenko Olive Oil Company sign. I love that. Um,
so
but
you
what was
you went into a lot more specifics on some of these bigger grouped scenes that I had
I,
I
I
put together.
I know, and the reason being is just because I had little pieces. I wasn't gonna. I mean, I almost go through the alphabet twice here in my scene selections, but just I wanted to throw out little tidbits of appreciation for certain pieces of it.
So
Uh,
what's your favorite?
my favorite scene is.
You didn't think about this beforehand, did you?
Well, no, but that's what I was building up to. That's what I was building up to. Okay, you got to give me a minute to think here because
All right.
in my mind, I
I'll tell
think.
I'll tell you, I'll say mine then first.
Okay, you say yours. I'll think about mine.
I immediately bolded this and I didn't even think twice about it. Vito goes back to Sicily, kills Don Ciccio. That was the best scene in the movie, I think. Like that was when he got revenge for his mom, his dad, his brother, and that fucking kill scene of that dude is awesome. When he leans in, he's like, "What? Andolini, and this is for you," and he just fucking cuts him right down the middle. Awesome. I I Jana fell asleep before that scene, and I woke her up because she had to watch that scene because I was so excited about it.
It's a great scene. It's a great scene. It's great cinematography of just that gutting of the pig, as they say. Um, I think my favorite scene, the starting of the family, where I was just going into of that or the olive oil business. It's established, and you have the fear in the landlord. I think that's a great scene. Because you have this guy who is this big, high and mighty guy, and it's a two-parter, right? Because Vito tries to have this compassion where he just comes up and it's like, "Hey, let me talk to you for a minute. Signora, she's down on her luck. She doesn't have the money for the rent, but she got rid of the dog. So if you can just honor that." And the guy, "Ah, okay, well, I don't know you, I don't like you, but fine, whatever. I'll honor it." And the dog stays too. What do you mean? And the rent is going to be less. "Ah, okay, well, whatever." And then he comes back and he's like, who are you? I don't like you. I distrust you. He goes, "Ask your friends about me and come back and we'll talk." And then he comes back, and that scene where he's becoming Don Corleone, the guy comes back. It's just a hilarious comedic relief scene, but then you have that scene where you see the power without him saying anything at all. He doesn't have to bring down the hammer on that guy. The guy just knows, I need to respect this man and do whatever he says. And he's like, "I'll give her $5 off her rent. I'll give her $10 off her rent. She can stay for free. I think it's fine."
He doesn't say a word. I think that is great acting by De Niro. And also, like you said, the comedic part. There's some really good music. It's like dun 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 dun, dun. Like it's a very like lighthearted moment of watching essentially like a crime lord have his way,
Yeah,
but also
and for the
doing
first time.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
And him just soaking it all in, just like,
think
yeah,
we
this
can
is my
agree.
thing.
I think we can agree though. All the best scenes are the flashback scenes. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. The Heath Ledger Award for scene stealing. I bet you have some good nominees here. I'm just going to throw my one nominee out because I only have one, and it's Robert De Niro playing Vito. And I think that when he's on screen, I can't or I choose not to notice anybody else.
I will accept your nominee, but I also have three completely different ones.
Oh, please. Yeah, good.
My first one is Senator Geary's brothel scene and his monologue in the congressional hearing, only because I don't think it was meant to be that dramatic. I think obviously the brothel scene where he has the dead hooker in his bed was, obviously it was all set up for him, but the almost on the brink of tears for that grown man to realize his entire career was going to be ended by all of this. And he's like, ah, you know what? And Tom comes in, hey, you're in luck. This is actually Fredo's brothel, so you're fine. You're set. But his drama, that's third for me. Second is Fredo's justification for why he went behind Michael's back in the boathouse. I think in that scene, you have the lead, but you have this supporting character that pleads his case and does a damn good job of it, where he's like, there was something in it for me. You're my kid brother. You shouldn't have been the one that taken care of me. And like the theatrics behind Fredo and all of that emotion coming through. And the number one was Vincenzo Pentangeli. The man didn't say a word. He walked into that courtroom, and that's all he had to do. That's all he had to do. And Frankie Pentangeli knew exactly what he needed to do. And that was just, okay, don't rat him out. The family's honor is secure.
I think it's maybe best that we just pick. Uh, let's go with Fredo. Let's go with John Cazale for present time, and then I think we do Robert De Niro for flashback time.
That sounds like a good
Both.
agree. Yeah, that's a great way of settling on those.
Yeah, good scene steal.
Correct. That's the right answer.
All right, so this next category is the Dante's Peak. So, what do we think is the peak of these things? So let's start because this is what this movie is, the gangster film, right? Here are my nominees. Some of these I know are not peaks, but I want to at least say them out loud. So, 1938, Angels with Dirty Faces. It may be the first gangster movie ever made. And I'm pretty certain it's not even a speaking movie. It may be speaking, but it's certainly not in color. All right, so that was just a joke. Godfather, though, comes out in 1972, the first one. This is in 74. Scarface is in 83. I'm probably missing some. The Untouchables is in 87. Goodfellas is in 90. The Departed is in 2006. And then we have The Irishman later on, but that's definitely not the peak. So those are my nominees for peak for gangster films. Do you have any more, or what do you think is the peak?
For the peak, I don't think you can have part two or three without one. So I think The Godfather's where you have to start for the peak. But I had the same lineup here. The only addition that I had was Casino. I threw that one in there.
What's that,
But
93 or 95 or something like that?
yeah, right
Yeah.
around the Goodfellas, Pesci, Ray Liotta, De Niro trilogy or trio.
So I know that you have to mention The Godfather Part One and Part Two. I know it would make sense to pick this as the peak, but I think like there's a run on I don't know. I think there's a run on mobster movies in the 70s, but there's also a run on mobster movies in the 90s. This is maybe hard depending on like your age. I personally think it's Goodfellas in 90. Um, but I think there's a big time case to be made for this because I did win Best Picture and it was the
Y-
first sequel. And again, it's followed up by like Serpico and Scarface and a bunch of movies in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah, and I mean, if you technically want to expand it from film to TV, you have to throw in The Sopranos too. I think that is also another giant piece of the whole gangster mafioso theme and genre that you throw out there, but I would agree with you that I think Goodfellas is that ultimatum of this is what we so the Godfather laid the foundation for it. The um the last brick of that genre is Goodfellas.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's talk Robert Duvall. He's had a really long, illustrious career. There's some things before Godfather 1, but I don't think it's worth mentioning. Does Godfather, Godfather 2, and obviously this in 74, Network in 76. These are all some fucking bangers, man. Apocalypse Now in 79, Tender Mercies in 84, and he wins Best Actor from an Academy Award in 84. The Natural also in 84. Days of Thunder is in 90. He has some really good work in the late 90s, in early 2000s. Deep Impact is in 98. Civil Action is in 98, and then Gone in 60 Seconds is in 2000. So
And
what do
and
you think is the peak for Duvall?
no mention of Secondhand Lions
Okay, well, I mean,
or The Judge.
I put peaks on there. I know that he's in those things, but like, all right,
No,
let's
I think it's Apocalypse Now. I mean, he's great as Tom, but I think Apocalypse Now is his peak.
yeah, but it's hard not to say. Okay, so I will agree with you that that's probably what most people know him. I think most people know him from as Tom Hagen, but I mean, how do you not say he won Best Actor for Tender Mercies? But the thing is that like I say that out loud, I had never once heard of that movie before until I was doing research for this episode. So I guess maybe his peak for acting acumen or recognition is probably that. But as far as like what does pop culture know him from? I mean,
Right. Yeah. No,
it's got to be Apocalypse Now or it depends on like if you're not into movies, it's probably Gone in 60 Seconds. Honestly, I hate to say it.
well,
uh,
yeah, because I mean, again, that you're going with the more recent version of him, and like it's almost like he's changed so much just from his looks too. I mean, if you look at him in The Judge, because that's the only reason I bring that one up is that's the most recent film I think he's been a part of, and you look at him as Tom, it's night and day difference. You're like, that's the same guy. Oh
yeah,
yeah, he has been acting for that long.
I'll tell you what though, he is great in Days of Thunder. I love Days of Thunder.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's get to the big guys. De Niro. De Niro has had one hell of a storied career. So I already all these are all movies I already mentioned. Couple I didn't. So he does Mean Streets in 73. He does this in 74, Taxi Driver in 76, The Deer Hunter in 78. I mean, this is a crazy fucking list of movies. Raging Bull in 80, Untouchables in 87, Goodfellas in 90, Backdraft in 91, Cape Fear in 91, Casino in 95, Heat in 95, Ronin in 98, Analyze This in 99, 1999, and then you already mentioned Meet the Fockers. That's in the early 2000s. So I kind of stopped there because I know he's been in things, but like that's certain like things in like since the early aughts or like whatever the 2000s are not those aren't that's not his peak. So what do
But
you go ahead.
Flowers of the or Killers of the Flower Moon
Yeah.
was good.
No, I'm not saying he hasn't been in things that are good, but
Yeah,
it's
but
certainly
I understand what you're saying, like with the
not the
peak side of
peak
it,
of
because
Robert De Niro. I okay, I'll go first
you
on
go
this.
first.
So we already mentioned the Academy Awards he's won. I think it's I actually don't think so. Raging Bull, like his
Yeah.
best acting job of all time. I don't think that's his peak. I think that's his best. I think that this is maybe one of his best as well. I think Deer Hunter is one of his best. But I think the peak of Robert De Niro as we know him is I think it's Goodfellas. I think it's 1990 is like when it's like this dude is no longer just an actor's actor. Because I think in the 70s and even early 80s, he's like just the best actor in the world. But as far as like I think of like peak as far as like when are you the most popular in pop culture when everyone knows who the fuck you are? And I think it's early. I think it's 1990 or 91 when he goes Goodfellas, Backdraft, Cape Fear in three those three movies in 2 years. That's my vote.
My vote was for Goodfellas. I have it written here. I don't know if we can, well, this is a podcast, so it wouldn't make much sense to show it, but I had Goodfellas. The one that I would think as later on, because you have that stretch, like you said, you have those three films in the 90s that were boom, you know exactly who this guy is. But for the next generation, you have again, it's you've hit the peak and you're starting to fall down, but you haven't quite like fallen off the top, but you recognize him as he starts to go into that fatherly role in Meet the Fockers, and then he's as the uncle in Killers of the Flower Moon and all these other roles. He's taking a more of a back seat where he's not the main, he's a supporting role instead of the leading role.
So I would say maybe like his serious dramatic pop culture is early 90s, but then I think that he has a resurgence when he becomes a comedic actor
Yeah.
and he gets a bunch of other bit roles. But it's analyze this. I think that it's hard to, I don't know if you've seen that or not, but I know that Meet the Fockers is big. Analyze this is what is him playing a mobster having basically anxiety attacks and has to be counseled by Billy Crystal. And it's the first time you saw an actor like that. Well, not in the first time, because Schwarzenegger did it too in the early 90s. But you've got a typecast actor or someone who's known for like their prowess of whatever, and then they completely switch genres, and you're like, oh fuck, this dude's really funny, and he's playing the straight man, not even the straight man. He's like hamming up like the caricature that we know of De Niro of being like this badass mafioso Italian whatever, and now he's crying when talking to his his capos or whatever like it, and that set the stage for Meet the Fockers and like a lot of the comedic roles that came after that. So um, he almost had like
And
a second resurgence. Certainly not his peak, but he had a separate, you know, I don't know, like a peak, I guess. Not peak, but like a upward swing of
a
his
crest,
crest. Sure.
second crest. And we would be remiss without mentioning Bad Grandpa.
Same thing. It's around the same time frame too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk Pacino. Pacino has had a very unique career. This Pacino might be the hardest person to do this with because I'm not sure he's ever had a peak. I think he's had like five peaks. Um, I don't know. Let's rattle off some big ones and then we can have this conversation. But again, Godfather 72, does Serpico in 73, this is in 74, Dog Day Afternoon is in 75. I mean, those four movies in a row, period, are amazing. Scarface in 83.
Yep.
He kind of got into like he got back into theater a little bit around this time. He does Dick Tracy in 90. He does Godfather 3 in 90. Glengarry Glen Ross is in 92. Scent of a Woman is in 92, where he wins Best Actor. Carlito's Way is in 93. Sorry, Heat is in 95, and then Any Given Sunday is in 99. I know he's been in things since 1999, but they're not his best work, so I kind of stopped there. Um,
Well, you didn't mention The Devil's Advocate either.
so I know I did not, and I do like Devil's Advocate, and there are quite a few movies I didn't mention, even though I do like them. I think we can agree that's not his peak. So
No, 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 no. Uh, I'll
that
go
being said,
first.
you go first on this one. Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna make it easy. Not easy, but I'm just gonna say Scarface. Scarface is just the one where it's like I am Tony Montana. It tells that history of you still have that mobster vibe to it, but it's not Italian. It's of Latin American descent and how that whole side of American history came into it. So
Yeah.
mine's Scarface. But
Yeah. Well,
please make the case for the other ones.
no, I think you're actually probably right as far again, when we talk peak, we're talking like peak of like pop culture, like when do people know you and like how like now, this many years later, not necessarily what do people know you as, or maybe that's a good question, but it's like how when have you been iconicized? I don't know if that's the right word or not, but if that is even a word. How many college dorm rooms have fucking Scarface posters on the walls, right? and
I saw a kid this morning at the gas station wearing a Scarface t-shirt.
t-shirts. Say hello to my little friend. Like, I mean, is it his best work? No. Is it his most celebrated work or most awarded work? I'd say no. But as far as like what has lasted the longest and people that aren't even film buffs or whatever, I mean, it's got to be Scarface.
It's just the most known.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's not my favorite. I like Heat way better than that. I think Dog Day Afternoon is a fucking masterpiece. And obviously the Godfather movie is incredible. We're talking
Oh
about
yeah.
one today, but yeah. All right, I think we agree. Yeah. Scarface. All right, we have a new category today.
Whoa.
I'm throwing it in here. Ready?
Curveball. Let's hear it.
It's called the Walter White Award. Okay. This is for
Elaborate for me.
this is for the character who broke bad. So these are good people who turned to bad, the movie edition. I know that Walter White is from a TV show. We're gonna focus on movie characters. So I wanted to throw this in. It's curveball for sure. Okay. So I'm gonna give you some nominees and you can think about it while I'm doing this, all right? You can even do some Google searching real quick. Again,
Ah,
characters who broke bad. First nominee, Charles Foster Kane in Citizen Kane. You don't care about that. Jack Torrance. Jack
okay,
Torrance.
so first off, I thought this was about characters in The Godfather.
Oh no.
But okay,
No,
here we go. All
these are
right.
characters in other films. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Well, do you want to give me some nominees of characters in The Godfather? Because let's do that first, and I'll give you the rest of my nominees.
Okay. So my interpretation of this was who broke bad in the film.
Okay, so
So
Corleone, Michael, of course.
Michael, Vito, even though you're rooting for him, Kay starts to do this at the end of Godfather 1, but then ultimately does it in 2.
Mhm.
And Fredo does it in Godfather 1 where he like tries to lash out against Michael in Vegas that first time. And he says, Michael says, Fredo, you're my brother. I love you, but don't ever disrespect me again. And then he does it again and he,
Just don't ever take sides against the family
oh, yeah, the family again.
in
Yes.
public. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then he does it again, even more so with a hit. So where Fredo was like, man, he's such a, sweet and sad guy, as Connie would put it, but he put a hit out on his own brother, his own family.
Okay.
Those
Uh,
were my nominees for it,
those are
but
good nominees. I don't think Fredo put a hit on his brother, but I think he was not smart enough to know that's what was going on.
yes,
Anyway, so all right, so I'm gonna keep going. Jack Torrance, who is what's his name from The Shining? What is his name from The Shining? Jack Nich
Johnny.
Jack Nicholas.
Oh, you're talking about the actor's name.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Saruman from Lord of the Rings. I'm assuming he was a good wizard at one point, but he certainly turned bad. Smeagol, also from Lord of the Rings, he becomes Gollum. He certainly breaks bad. Here are some
I am
better
enjoying this category.
here are some better nominees. Those are all good ones, I think. But
They're good.
Anakin Skywalker,
Okay. Now I'm with you. I'm with you.
okay. Wanda Maximoff, also known as the Scarlet Witch,
Okay.
and then finally I have Harvey Dent, who becomes Two-Face.
hmm
So those are my nominees. I mean, there's one glaring obvious answer, but I'd be curious what you would who you would give this Walter White Award to.
So we can agree that it's Anakin Skywalker.
Okay, good. All right, that's the answer.
That's the answer. But as far as
Second place.
second place, close addition, close second. Well, you know, hmm. But you didn't mention Voldemort. He starts out as Tom Riddle. He's just an innocent
Oh,
wizard as
oh,
well.
he's always a shady kid. Remember when
Yeah.
in the sixth movie? He's like he's up to shit. No, he's bad all the time.
I think the craziness of John in The Shining, Jack Nicholas in The Shining, would be second for that one.
I think you're right. I think that's actually a pretty good vote because seems like a normal dad, maybe weird, eccentric. He's a
Hey, let's
novelist.
go on a trip. It'll
But
be
by the end
great.
of the movie, he's trying to kill his fucking kid and definitely, I mean, and his wife. Like he loses it. I know he's possessed by whatever. Like, but
Right.
okay. But Anakin Skywalker,
Yeah, we can agree Anakin
he
Skywalker.
broke bad the best.
He did it the bestest.
Okay. All right. Quoth the Raven Award. So the way that this kind of works, I think the best is that we'll just take turns with quotes. Okay. And if we have any overlaps, then just skip that one. A lot of the quotes are from Michael. We already mentioned, I think, the best one, which is "I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart." And also the second best one, maybe actually the best one. My father taught me many things. He taught me in this room. He taught me keep your friends close, be your enemies closer. But here's another Michael quote that wasn't mentioned before. I don't feel I have to wipe everyone out, Tom.
Yep,
Just my enemies.
that's all. That's all. Yeah. I had Vito's first mention of I'll make him an offer he can't refuse.
Mhm.
And it's more of a conversation piece between Fredo and Michael where he says that's the way Pop wanted it. Michael says that's the way Pop wanted it, and Fredo lashes out, it ain't the way I wanted it. And
Mhm.
then it's so freaking cold in that room because it's wintertime. You can actually see Michael's breath for being how cold he is to his brother Fredo, where he's like, "You're nothing to me now. You're not a brother. You're not a friend. I don't want to see you. I don't want to know what you do, and I want to be informed when you're seeing mother, so I don't see you." It's like,
Yeah, it's cold.
damn, damn.
Another Michael quote: "If anything in this life is certain, if history has taught me anything or taught us anything, it is that you can kill anyone."
Yep. The last one I have here is Le Honora de la Familia sta posto, which that's what Tom Hagen says to Vincenzo uh, Pentangeli. That means the honor of the family is intact. I feel like that was a good quote of like that whole like
Yeah,
power over of what Sicily has still over the Italian families in the U.S.
yeah, totally. I got a few more with the senator. So the first senator quote is he's like, I want your answer and then money by noon tomorrow, and don't you contact me again ever. From now on, you deal with Turnbull. And Michael says, Senator, you can have my answer now if you like. My final offer is nothing. Having the fee for the gaming license, which I would appreciate you would put up personally. Um, and then I guess a little bit before that is Senator also saying, like, I don't like your kind of people. I don't like to see you come out to this clean country in your oily hair, dressed up in those silk suits and try to pass yourself off as decent Americans. I'll do
Wait,
business with you, but the fact is that I despise your masquerade, the dishonest way you pose yourself and your whole fucking family. And Corleone says, Senator, we're both part of the same hypocrisy, but never think it applies to my family.
what? What? Who are you? Who are you kidding? Who are you kidding, Michael?
Yeah, you guys are both, well, they're all the worst.
Yeah.
Uh, I will say K has a really interesting moment, which does speak to like the current, like even the current issue with like the patriarchy or whatever. But um, when she says, "Michael, I don't want your son," blah blah. It was a son, Michael, a son, and I had it killed because this must all end. That's pretty fucking intense.
It is. She also in that same, I think in that same sentence mentions the whole Sicilian thing, which is kind of this whole like
Yeah,
it's a very oversimplification of what has been happening this entire time.
just like our marriage is an abortion, something that's unholy and evil. Yeah. I have one more quote, which is from Vito, and you kind of mentioned this earlier when we were talking about scenes, but when he says in Italian, "Do me this favor, I won't forget it. Ask your friends in the neighborhood about me. They'll tell you I know how to return a favor."
Yep.
Next category, you're canceled. Are we getting rid of anything? If this is remade again today, I only have one thing. And I don't even know if it's actually a thing you get rid of, but Jana definitely balked at this a few times, and it was kind of glaring and kind of, again, uncomfortable slightly. But I just mentioned the patriarchy stuff. There's a lot of like toxic masculinity nonsense, and again, I know that's the time, and I'm not even talking
Yep.
about I'm talking about like Michael currently. Like, was it a boy? It's like, all right, calm down a little bit with that. It just seemed pretty over the top.
Would it have been okay for you to have lost a daughter, Michael? Like,
Yeah, I think that was just like, I'm not saying you would change it, but it was noticeably uncomfortable and kind of awkward now.
yeah.
So,
For me, again, that scene, I think the hard stance on abortion would not go over well, despite the Corleones being, strong Catholics, and that whole irony in that sense too of, oh, we're Catholic, we're religious, and the whole thing starts with the communion. I think that would have a lot of criticism today. I think that scene with Connie and Merle again, where again that toxic masculinity of him telling his sister what she has to do with her life.
mhm.
Um, Obviously Michael abusing his wife and keeping the children from their mother. And I think just the other small little thing that I don't know if I was thinking of it from the perspective of like getting a lot of criticism and hate in today's society would be Pentangeli's remark very early on about how he thought the Rosado brothers were terrible because of the people they were working with, based solely because, and he describes them by their race, of their, characteristics of he's like, that's who they're working with. It's bad for business. All this, bad, 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 bad. And it's like, yeah, you probably couldn't say that if you were to remake that today.
Yeah, that's true. So this is Lambert's favorite category, another Spider-Man again. So we are
This
going to recast some of these roles. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that De Niro is actually younger than Pacino?
in
Hmm.
this film, well, I mean,
In life.
yes, I realize, I realize as I asked that question that it still applies to today, not
Still
just the
today.
film.
Still applies today. I didn't realize that. So
I didn't know that.
I only have two characters to recast. I know we could recast a ton, but I only thought I'd recast Vito and Michael. Do you want
Mhm.
to recast anybody else?
I think you could have a lot of fun recasting old, like I said at the beginning, is that you have so many of these old mafioso guys that portrayed their characters so well. You could throw them in at any point of the old world or in the flashbacks of the old Don, the Don in Sicily, Don Ciccio. Ciccio, he would be so easy to recast. Don Fanucci, so easy to recast. The hardest thing I had with this was recasting Michael and Vito. I actually flipped myself for what I said who I would recast Michael as in The Godfather 1. And I'll refer back to the NBC dramatic series This Is Us. I think Milo Ventimiglia,
And to Miglia, yeah.
he would be a great young Vito. I think he would just portray it super
Okay.
well. I think he
Let's do
would blend in.
let's do
Go ahead.
Vito first. Let's do Vito first. So De Niro's 31 and Milo Ventimiglia would be really good. I don't disagree. Do you have anybody else?
No, that was the only one I could settle on.
So I have, and I'm assuming he's Italian or Sicilian or something. I had also, so do you know who Christopher Abbott is? It's a pretty obscure person. Have you ever seen the TV show Girls?
Yeah.
So he is the ex-girlfriend of Allison Williams, who plays Marnie. So I think he would be really good. I also have, I don't know if this works, but I kind of like it. I also have Adam Driver.
Oh,
I think Adam Driver could be a very, very good. I'm trying to think of someone who can do a lot of acting with their silence and just like their
yeah.
I don't know, like their presence.
hmm I think that would be a good one. I think again, if you're recasting it, I
just to
think he
be
would
fair.
have the determination and the strong will to do it. I think that's a good one. I think he could do
I
it.
think I think he's okay. I like Milo Ventimiglia way better. He's a little bit older. He's not in his 30s, right? He's in his
I
40s.
know. That's what I was struggling with.
So I think let's go with Milo. He's the winner. Now let's recast Michael, who again is 3 years older. So Pacino was 3 years older. He was 34 at the time. I will say mine two first, and I don't necessarily like them. I have Jason Schwartzman, who we know Jason Schwartzman, right? Uh, I think that I'm trying I'm thinking of like the Jason Schwartzman that I know from um Scott Pilgrim, where he is like a very nice guy, but then just fucking can lose his shit, and you're like, oh, he actually is like pretty intense out of nowhere. Kind of a little guy. Wouldn't be surprised if he has maybe a little man syndrome, which I think that Michael definitely has. So that's my first nominee. My second nominee is Chris Evans, if we want to go prettier and like a more, I don't know if respected actor is the right word, but certainly a better box office draw,
Mhm.
like Chris Evans. Um, I'm actually going to pull Adam Driver into this category too. Even though I nominated him for Vito, I think he could play Michael, maybe even better. Like I'm thinking about Adam Driver and how he can certainly fly off the fucking handle. I
Absolutely.
don't know. All right, so those are my three nominees: Schwartzman,
My
Evans, and Driver.
my two were 100% cop outs. They're 50 years old. They're not 34. They're not even close to it. But I think they could do a good job on it. The first one, Leo DiCaprio.
Sure. Yeah.
Second one, I haven't seen much of his like mafioso thing, but I think he could do it really well as Bobby Cannavale.
Yeah, I totally agree. The problem is that they are so much older.
I know. I
You know?
know. I like your take on Schwartzman of being the guy that could just absolutely be a ticking time bomb. Like he's very prim, proper, professional when he needs to be, but if something doesn't go his way, boom, he punches you right in the face.
Tell you
In
what, and
Driver.
I really like Schwartzman's acting in the Fargo TV show. And, it really like I think like showed another side of like he's actually a really good actor.
Oh
So
yeah, and any of the Wes Anderson things that he's been in too. I mean, they've all like it's almost like one character that he plays like throughout all of the films, but it's totally different from anything else that he does, where he's like that very like, oh, hello, nice to meet you kind of thing. Like he could put on the facade to be the business guy.
yeah, totally. All right, so to stream or not to stream, should we make this a TV show? I can just say that my personal perspective is that it's great as a movie, but it's also very, very long. If you take the three movies, it's like 10 hours almost. I think this would be an amazing like anthology movie series or miniseries. And I just mentioned Fargo. If you've ever seen Fargo, the TV show, it's very much inspired by. It's got a lot of themes cinematically to like the film, but they kind of take like the theme of it and they're like, here's what it would look like if it was in this time period. Here's what it would look like if it was in this. And you could do it with the same storyline. You could even take like the books and readapt them into
That's
like
exactly what I was going to say, is that you could take each part and make part one an entire season.
yeah. Yeah, that'd
And,
be
part two you would take in the flashbacks you would take into part one or season one, and then part two you would do all the different dealings that Michael has to go through because there is such a large gap between two and three that you could fill in all that backstory from Uzo's books.
or you even throw in like the last Don, you're like, it's not connected to the main storyline, but here's like this one offer, but it's the same theme, and you could even like have possibly crossover characters. I think it'd be
Yeah.
I'm actually shocked they haven't done it yet. I'm sure they will at some point.
Right, right. I think it would be great as a TV show because of how long it is and because of all the parts that aren't there in the films. Okay, so we are into tomorrow is another day. What happens next? Elaborate on our category, sir.
All right, so I think it's here's where we have our Godfather 3 conversation. I don't want it to be that long because we're going to do Godfather 3 next year because it's going to be coming up on its 35th anniversary. My question for you is, again, we know what kind of happens next as far as the films. Why do you think part 3 was considered such a failure? I'm assuming you've seen part 3, right?
Yes, yes, I have. I think just because of, well, there was such a large gap, first off.
Hmm.
And I think when you have that large of a gap, people have such high expectations when it does come around. Because, I mean, you think about it, you're talking about a 16-year span that, if you think about somebody that saw The Godfather Part 1 in 1972, and you fast forward to 1990, that is 18 years. So that's almost, in in retrospect, a lifetime of things that can happen to you, change your perspective on life, everything that you have going on in your life. I mean, 18 years ago for anybody, that's a huge chunk of time. I think they should have done part three a little sooner. Maybe Coppola didn't have the idea all put together at that point. But from a story perspective, it's hard to pinpoint one reason why, but two and one were so just put on a pedestal that it was almost impossible that almost anything you would have thrown in there would have been categorized as subpar.
So I'm going to answer the question that I posed to you, which is I'm not sure it is a failure because it was nominated for Best Picture. And I mean, you could argue it maybe could have won. I think the reason why that people I personally think were turned off by it because I upon the I watched it again last week. We are watching all three, or like let's watch them all to get caught up. It's actually a really good film, in my opinion. There's some suspect stuff about it, I suppose, but you could say the same thing about any movie. I think it's Fredo. When you kill Fredo, you no longer are like you are sympathetic to Michael in the first movie. Like he
Yeah,
gets put in this situation, you're like, man, he's just doing his best to save the family, like in a bad situation. Good for him. In the second one, you kind of see like Michael losing it, or maybe not being as sympathetic anymore, but you're super sympathetic to Vito. So like you're like, I'm still in, I'm in on this family. And then he kills Fredo, and you're like, I don't like the main character anymore. I think the Corleone family can kind of like get fucked because like they're no longer like the lovable,
they're no longer a family anymore.
and yeah, and it becomes like of course this giant disconnect. I think that Andy Garcia like tries to bring you back into it, and like he's maybe the highlight of the film. But I really think it's that Fredo. It's I mean I get that why you do that at the end of the set number two, but like you have to know that if you do that at number two, like there's no coming back for Michael anymore. Like despite
Right.
despite him finally making the family legitimate. And I know there's a lot of other reasons why that happened, but having said it, like you don't in any way sympathize with this character, and so it's like I'm out for like the movie, and I think that's why even though like again it was nominated for Best Picture, and it is a good movie in my opinion. That's why I think people didn't like it as much personally.
Yeah, I think that pretty much does
It'd be
the
it'd be interesting to like to almost like think like okay well what happens after three though because after three you actually become sort of sympathetic to Michael again because of what happens to you know his children and everything.
yeah, Sophia and
Anthony.
uh or yeah, Sophia and Anthony. Thank you.
Yeah, and then again you got Andy Garcia's character coming. You're like, I fucking like this dude. He's like Santino, and I really did like Sonny in the first one.
Yeah.
I don't know. It'd be kind of fun to see what happens now. Like you flash forward to 2024. Like, what's the Corleone family look like at this point? Because Andy Garcia's character is kind of like, hey, I'm still swimming in these fucking dirty waters. I don't mind it. Even though everyone else has become too big of pussies to do it. I guess. I don't know. It'd be interesting to think about that.
So how far do you wait then? Because you had 2 years between one and two. You had 16 between two and three. Do you
I'm
wait
just
32
saying.
years between?
I'm
I
just
know, I'm just saying, I'm just
making
posing the question.
I'd be curious, make a movie now with Andy Garcia's character, post Godfather 3. This is again, this is a bigger conversation for the Godfather 3 podcast, but I would like to see like what happens now, or where is Michael now at this point? Like he's in his 70s or 80s. He's now become basically Vito's age, maybe actually older than that, and he has since turned the legitimized the family, even though again trying to pull them back in. I don't know. I'd be curious to see like what how is he handling that with his grandchildren at this point, and if he has any. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think the
and I think you have enough time that has passed too that you could still cast all your same people to play your same characters, which adds to that whole level of the story too of like it's in real time. But yeah, I would be interested to see where what was his name? Vincent. Where how Vincent would kind of where he would take the family. What racketeer would they modernize the racketeering for what he's working through, the different pieces of the business? That would be an interesting concept too.
well, if you think about one and three, they're very linear, and then two is a lot of flashbacks. I think actually four would be cool to see flashbacks of, again, Garcia is Vincent Garcia's character, and like what he did in the meantime of now where he is, and like maybe Michael's in there a little bit, but he's almost like a side character.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some nerd facts because there's plenty to talk about.
Hmm.
Hyman Roth's character is based on real life mobster Mayor Lansky. And at the time he was living in Miami, he apparently phoned Lee Strasberg and said, "Now,
Which is
why
hilarious.
wouldn't you have made me more sympathetic? After all, I am a grandfather." Uh, Mayor Lansky immigrated to New York from Poland, grew up in the Lower East Side. He was apparently buddies with Bugsy Siegel, and obviously Bugsy Siegel is supposed to be Mo Green. So
Again, Coppola was just like, I don't know. I don't know who this guy is. This is a totally unique character.
clearly both those characters were based on, yeah, Mo Green and Mayor Lansky.
Yeah. I think the next one here you have is hilarious too. That they went back and had to reshoot some of the flashback scenes because they wore pants with zippers. And obviously in 1974 there were pants with zippers, but in the what was the time frame for the flashback? It was 1931. They did not have pants with zippers. They had pants with buttons. So they had to go back and reshoot the scenes with button fly trousers.
But like good on them to like recognize that then in 74. If that was made right now in 2024, people would lose their fucking shit.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
You
just
have
saying,
so
like,
many
that's all
gym
people.
class heroes isn't the right term for it, but you have so many subject matter experts that would
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, that's wrong." Yeah, so it has to be on them. Uh,
So De Niro spent 4 months learning to speak the Sicilian dialect of Italian in order to play Vito Corleone. And nearly all the dialect that his character speaks in the film was in Sicilian. And you kind of mentioned this, but he only speaks 8 words of English in The Godfather, in the
mhm.
entire film.
When little Vito arrives at Ellis Island, he is marked with a circled X. Ellis Island immigrants were marked with this if the inspector believed the person had a mental or physical defect,
Hmm.
which is also like not foreshadowing because obviously Vito doesn't have anything wrong with him, but mentally he's gone through a lot. So yeah, maybe he does have this whole like defect because at the time he was a mute. He never spoke anything, and that's what his mom was trying to plead the case for before she got blasted.
Yeah, and obviously defect's not the right word. He's dealing with some serious fucking trauma. Like,
Right, right. Poor guy.
so in an early version of the script, an ongoing storyline was that Tom Hagen was having an affair with Sonny Corleone's widow. Now that gets discarded, but there is a line which is kind of weird and out of place when Michael Corleone tells Hagen that he can take his quote wife, children, mistress to Las Vegas. Um,
Maybe this SMEs would have caught that one.
yeah, yeah, I was gonna say it's definitely in the movie. I'm like, there's not even a single moment where it alludes to Hagen being a philanderer, and then all of a sudden that line's in. I'm like, okay, I guess everyone's just banging each other. Oh, sounds good.
Yep. That was one thing again in the family Corleone that kind of sparked a whole spat with the Corleone family was Tom was in college, he was having fun with a girl and ended up being the wrong girl.
Hmm.
Originally, it was supposed to be Clemenza who agrees to testify against the Corleones, which would have just been detrimental for the family. Like that would have hurt more, I think, than having this Pentangeli guy come in. But according to Francis Ford Coppola, Castellano was the highest paid actor in The Godfather. Part one wanted to write his own lines and wanted a large salary increase. Consequently, his character was replaced with Frankie Pentangeli, Michael Gazzo, who received an Oscar nomination for the performance, but according to Ardell Sheridan, Castellano refused to regain the 50 pounds required for the role due to health reasons, so Coppola decided to replace him rather than have a thinner Clemenza.
Yeah, so there's a couple different stories there, but either way, Menza was cut, and then comes Frankie. De Niro is one of only 8 actors, and here are the other people: Sophia Loren, Christoph Waltz, Roberto Benigni, Benicio del Toro, Penelope Cruz, Marion Cotillard, and Yon Yon Jung to win an Academy Award for a role primarily in a language other than English, since almost all of his English again is in Sicilian.
Yep,
So
that's that's insane.
pretty high class group of actors there.
Another big thing for this film trilogy and the part two and specifically is that this was the first sequel to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. The second, as of 2022, the last was The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. It was also the only film with a prequel storyline to be nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, really cool. The last one I have is Marlon Brando and De Niro are the only actors to win Oscars for playing the same cat or same character.
One other one that I had that I had just recently read about was that the door to the Janko olive oil import office, Coppola and everybody else in that scene except the Italian actor or Italian comedian that played the landlord knew that this ruse was going to happen. But you can see there's construction workers working out on the front. That door specifically, if you put a nail in the framework of the door, it couldn't be opened from the inside, and they didn't tell the landlord that. So him being a comedian, Coppola wanted to see what how he would improvise when the door wouldn't open. So that door legitimately wouldn't open while he was freaking out trying to get out of the cage, so to speak, with Vito Corleone. And then finally, I think it was Janko or Tessio went over and opened the door. And as they opened the door, the nail was removed by the guy out in the front, and then he quickly ran out like a frightened little rabbit. But I thought that was a funny little piece.
That's awesome. And he played it so well. He's like, oh, okay. So he backs out. Like
Yeah.
what an awesome scene. Yeah.
Yep. 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 The last thing that I kind of had here that I wanted to run down, I don't have a whole lot of symbolism, but I'm the symbolism guy. Uh, First off, we have in part two, we've got windows. Windows are used throughout the entire film. You see them when Michael is watching Fredo be shot. You see the reflection of the Statue of Liberty presenting this whole giant, vast opportunity in front of young Vito. They're viewed as the inescapable future and destiny for these two. Vito obviously having a plethora of opportunity, Michael's eventual spiral and downfall that he can't avoid. And Michael's life almost ends in front of a window when the hit is put on him and the gunshots ring through.
Yeah.
Next one I have is oranges. Every powerful mobster or every man of power throughout the film is seen with oranges at one point or another when they are asserting their dominance. So the first one we have is Don Fanucci. He takes the orange away from the vegetable or the fruit stand guy without asking for it. Vito graciously accepts the free bag of oranges from the same cart vendor in Little Italy. In the Cuba scene, when the meeting of all of the giant heads of industry and gambling and recreation are met, there are giant fruit bowls in front of all of them. All of them are filled with fruit, and oranges being particularly stand out in front of all of them. And Michael in a study, when he's discussing what to do about Roth and Pentangeli, he is also has an orange in his hand. And Fanucci and Michael are the only two that eat their oranges when in power, kind of showing their similarities between the two when you do those flashbacks. Next one I have
I'm
is
power hungry.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, the next one that I have that I thought was pretty clever was the birthday cake scene with Hyman Roth. As he's celebrating his birthday, they're divvying up all these cake slices, and as the member that is in attendance there of Roth's little circle of delegates is getting a piece of cake, he's explaining exactly what piece of the business they're going to get when Roth dies. And even when they hand Roth a bigger piece of the cake, he's like, "Oh no, I want a smaller slice." And then you kind of, it's ironically mentioned later on that Michael is like, "Yeah, Hyman Roth's been dying from the same heart attack for 20 years."
Hmm.
Last one I have is Michael's estate. So Michael was trying to epitomize everything that Vito Corleone was doing, and in addition to the estate that Mike or that Vito had in New York, he wanted to build it in Reno, in Nevada. But what this symbolizes is his attempt and failure to control his own destiny. So the manifest destiny is that expansion westward. He tried to expand westward to pull the control of the Corleone family all the way over. But what he's found is kind of like what happened with the Roman Empire. Once you get so big, it's hard to control all the little smaller pieces and eventually falls and collapses, implodes on him.
Well, yeah, you run into other monarchs or know, as like previously established organizations that you're the big fish in a small pond out here, in New York or whatever. And you come out here, it's like, maybe you're not quite the big fish you thought you were.
Yep.
So really the last category, or second to last, really, inner nerd thoughts. Did we learn anything? So anything that you want to think about or you want to express right now? I, I got some questions for you. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't have any questions, but first thing I just want to say, it's hard to be the top dog. It's hard to be the guy that's in control of everything. And
Yeah.
it's even harder to be thrown into that position with little to no experience whatsoever. I mean, I kind of already knew
You're
that
talking
going
about
into
talking
the
about
film.
Michael.
Talking about Michael and Vito, it's hard for both of them to control that, but Vito does such a better job of it, of taking taking everything and kind of storing it away and keeping it away from the family, being a gracious father, being a good husband, and also being a commanding, yet somebody that everybody in that Corleone family wanted to follow. And with Michael, you have this whole thing where he's trying to have this strong iron fist brought down over everybody, including his family, and it ends up everybody's gone. I mean, that last scene that you see Michael in, he's the only thing he has is his memories of his family in that empty boathouse dark scene because everybody's gone. There's nobody left in his family.
Well, I mean, think about themes. I think that the idea is that how people come to power affects your dynamics differently. So, like, Vito coming to power was essentially going from nothing to growing into this gigantic family. And Michael's the opposite. He starts with this gigantic family and eventually becomes all alone,
You're
right?
exactly right.
Like, how does power and influence and everything else like affect a person? Like, I don't even want to say like the reason why you do it because I think they're both doing it for the same reason. They're both
Yeah,
doing it for family and for what they think is right. But, sometimes when you do it, you gain all this influence and love and respect. But sometimes when you do it, you lose everything.
yeah.
I think
And you
maybe,
have that little sprinkle of nepotism in there too, that your people below you are going to lose respect for you too. Vito earned his respect from his peers when he started out.
well, yeah, I think that's also the difference if you think about like, I mean, Game of Thrones or like even like you look at like real life Roman Empire taking over like you look at like Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Great, or even like his dad versus like the last Roman emperor or monarch or whatever. Like you can see, or even the pharaoh, you can see the difference of like I claim power versus I was given power, and like it's different. It's really fascinating to think about it, and it is kind of parallels to like real life, leaders of industry or leaders of like cultures and civilizations.
Absolutely.
So here are some questions. Mine are not as deep as that. Mine are usually silly things I think about as I'm watching.
Sure.
So my first question is: so Michael kisses Fredo and says, "I know it was you, whatever," but then says, "Where are you going? Don't run away. I want to take you back to the U.S." So my question is, if Fredo gets in the car there, does Michael just straight up fucking kill him, or do they go back and everything is kind of forgiven because they have this really long, awkward, cab ride slash plane ride back to Vegas or Nevada or whatever? Like, are they? I'm just saying, like, it seems weird that he would say, "Come back with me, ride with me," just to kill you, versus 5 years later or a year later or whatever, I'm gonna kill you with on a boat with it just seemed odd.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that would have been something that I would have liked to have seen explored because you may have had a heart to heart with brothers where if Fredo right then, because that's still fresh in Michael's mind, like he just learned that Fredo was the one that did it. If Fredo comes clean there and doesn't lie in front of him and then expose himself like literally the next scene, the Fredo says, "Look, I never knew that he was going to put a hit out on you. I thought it was just going to be he was going to give me a piece of the pie. You were going to get your deal. Everything would have been fine." I think
Right.
Michael would have been much more understanding, and I think you would have seen a better dynamic form between those two. And then Fredo would have still had a lot to learn, but I feel like Michael could have offered him up like, hey, here's a little advice on how to do this and do that. I'll give you a piece of the pie. Here's this. I'm sorry that you felt that way. Let's be brothers again. You're my only Ken that I have left. And I don't think he would have
Yeah.
killed him, but instead Fredo runs off, which is the same thing that he does time in and time, time and time again throughout the entire anthology. And at that point, Michael's like, "All right, that was to me, that was your last chance to come clean to me because I know what you know, and you've run away from it again. That tells me that you have no remorse. Now
Yeah.
I'm done. You are
Time
still
to
alive because of our mother."
the time to marinate made it worse actually.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm just going in order. So the next, I have a couple, three more things. Intermission. Mentioned this already. First of all, I love the intermission, and unfortunately, I know it makes sense story wise, but the intermission happens after 2 hours, and then it with less than 75 minutes left. So it's like it's more like almost three-fourths. It's like five-eighths or whatever. So anyway, I think the intermission should make more sense halfway. But my,
Mhm.
my main question for you is intermission in a movie. Should we bring this back?
I I think if you have a film that is longer than 3 hours,
Mm,
100% yes. Simply because if you are going to the film, from my own experience, I will sit and hold it as long as I can. But my wife has the bladder of a toddler.
yeah,
So if we're watching a film and I want her to see something or I want to experience something with her, then yeah, she'd be like, just wait till the intermission, hold off on it, and then we'll be fine. Because then it also just kind of gives you a break to digest everything too. Because there's also been times where like you watch a whole movie and you're like, it takes until you watch it the second time where you're like, oh yeah, I do remember that particular scene happened where you don't have as much time to digest because you're like, holy crap, I have this whole thing. So I think 3 hours, yes, bring it back.
yeah, I agree. I think about like the movie Endgame, which is the last movie I can think of that where I was like, this is amazing movie, and you know, I can watch it all the way through, but also intermission would have been fine.
Yeah.
Would have worked for me. All right. Here's something that really bothers me. So I think that, and I know that like we don't know what the passage of time is like, but when Michael leaves Kay and the kids to go deal with the Hyman Roth thing, they seem to be in like a pretty good spot. Like they're lovey and the kids or whatever. When he comes back, Kay is like, "You're the worst. I had an abortion. I can't deal with this anymore." I guess my only really comment is, and I don't know if you felt the same way, but it seemed like that was a really fucking quick turn of events. Like Kay all of a sudden is like, "Oh, I can't believe this," even though she, went along with it in the first one and had the kids. I don't know. I didn't like Kay's all of a sudden like departure from being a part of this whole thing. Like she's like, "I'm mad that I couldn't go get groceries, and now all of a sudden I'm gonna have an abortion." I don't even care about the abortion thing, not to be crass, but like that wasn't the issue. It was like all of a sudden Michael absolutely, I'm sorry, all of a sudden Kay hates Michael, will not have another kid with him, and is like, this is the worst, and you're the worst. Just seemed like really quick.
It did, but I think you also couldn't. I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this one. I think that the opposing viewpoint on this is that if you look at it from Kay's perspective, there was just an attempt on the entire family's life by association just because Michael was standing there. She was in bed not far away from where the shots were fired off at. And then the next day, Michael leaves and goes right away to business and takes care of all of the business proceedings that he already had planned to do anyway. And if what happened in the movie actually happened is that he didn't even address it, he didn't talk to her about it, he didn't say, "Hey, how are you doing? What are your thoughts on us being almost shot at and killed and it was our own family?" All of these things. I know he doesn't know it yet, but he knew it was somebody inside of the Corleone family. If Kay is seething over all of this stuff the entire time that he goes to Miami and then Cuba, misses Christmas, misses New Year's, misses all of these impactful moments for their children, then I can understand a little bit more why she is so mad and so pissed off at him. But I still think, yes, to your point, it does happen quick, even though all of that happens. I still think like that's still a conversation that you need to have with your significant other before you just go and do it almost spitefully.
Yeah, I almost feel like the like Kay has done a disservice because her only scenes basically are her and Michael get in that fight, her and Michael almost get killed, and then she tries to leave with the kids to go get groceries, and like that's it. Like she's
Well, and then
basically
he closes the door on her.
well, and that's from the first movie. Like
No, no, no. This happened in this one too, in part two, where she was with the kids and Michael walks in and he doesn't say a word, but Connie's trying to get him out, and he just is like, "Fuck you,"
yeah, I
closes
do
that door.
I do think, and maybe she wouldn't be in my opinion, like a very hated character if maybe they could have done a little bit more, a few more scenes. And fuck, the movie's already 3 hours and 22 minutes. Make it 3 hours and 30 minutes, and like have a minute or two like interspersed, sprinkled in
Jump
there,
back where she's going through all of this.
dealing with these things, and like yeah, I mean that would have been better for the character.
Yes.
All right, so final thoughts. My first, my really my big question is, who did it better, Godfather 1 or Godfather 2?
I've been thinking on this question for a long time, and I think Godfather 2 in the flashbacks with Vito did it better because you already know who Vito Corleone is in Godfather 1 or Part 1, that building that character and learning who he was, the backstory that he had, I think that part sets the stage for everything. But that's the difficult part about this question, right? Is that you can't have part two without part one, but you can't have part one without the backstory of Vito Corleone coming up. So I think, I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I know a lot of people think that two was better than one was better than two. It's a very polarizing opinion. I think the flashbacks, the the half of part two is the better Godfather storyline because you see Vito earning the respect of his peers and his entire township that then thrusts him into the position that he has in part one.
This is why you're on this episode, because my answer is flashbacks are the best part, then Godfather 1, then the present time of Godfather 2. That's the ranking. And I don't know if you can say, I've always thought Godfather 2 is better than 1, only because the flashbacks are so much, I think, more superior than anything else in any of the movies. However, watching the movie from start to finish and having just done it again, and my opinion may change in a year or a month or a day. The most recent rewatch, Godfather 1 as a movie is better than Godfather 2 as a movie, as a whole movie. Only because I think the present time Godfather stuff with Michael and Hyman Roth, there are just some really slow, not great parts. And the first movie has there are very few lulls. I mean, the movie is just fucking banger scene after banger scene. We already talked about that in a previous episode. But the flashbacks in two are superior to anything else, which is what brings two up close even to this, like how amazing Godfather 1 is. So we both said it.
Absolutely. And one other thing that I will say too is that in Godfather 1, which goes back to why this is like the cornerstone piece of building the mafioso storyline, is that you really don't see any mafia violence that is basically like that is what it is. If you don't accept the offer, then you are left to deal with the consequences. And you see so much of that in one where there is a lot of violence, there is a lot of backdoor dealings. There are all of these deals being made where Michael wants the deal to be made and he wants to expand it, but none of it happens. There's a
Mhm.
couple of the little scene where you get Pentangeli is almost killed, but it's constant in Godfather 1. So as far as the mafia deal goes, yeah, you see that in Little Italy, and that whole Sicilian thing in air quotes is still so heavily looming over what happens in the flashbacks and in part one, but you start to lose that Sicilian thing in the present day part two.
Yeah. Man, I will say though, this movie's amazing. And
Oh, absolutely.
you haven't seen it, what the fuck you do with yourself? Like, come on.
Yeah. Go watch it. You've heard of it. You know the t-shirts that are around it now, the dog father, the cat father. Go watch it.
100%. All right, last part of the podcast, Nerd Outreach. Thank yous, Brandon. Thank you for coming, man. This has been awesome. You are the man. This has been, I mean, you really bring with these Godfather episodes.
I appreciate it and it is such a passion for me and it's such an honor to come in and be a part of this and nerd out with you guys and do these deep dives on some shit that Coppola maybe didn't even mean to do, but he did it anyway, and damn it, we're gonna appreciate it.
Well, I'd like to have you back again. We're definitely gonna have you back again next year for Godfather 3, but also think about something else that you may be super interested in doing. So
Sure. I'll
put it
keep
out
you
there.
posted. I'll throw some ideas out.
Awesome. So as always, you can send us show suggestions to nerdsnewcoolpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, whatever you call it. Also, you can watch any of our Nerd Bites, Nerd Takes on YouTube. We had some really good, successful episodes recently, so check those out. Our next episode, we're going to tackle Lambert and I, The Matrix, which came out 25 years ago in
Oh my
1999,
gosh.
my man.
Wow.
Do you love The Matrix?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, we do too, and we cannot wait. And that was the year we graduated from high school. You were not born yet.
Whoa, whoa. I had 6 years under my belt, my good man.
Oh, that's right. I forget. You're younger than I think you are. No, no, I'm sorry. You are actually older than I think you are. You are young at heart. Anyway, that was terrible.
I will tune in. You let me know when that Matrix episode
Oh,
comes out and I will tune in.
please do. Maybe we'll get you on a Matrix Reloaded or Matrix Revolutions. Who knows?
We'll see. Time will
All
tell.
right. Well, until then, we'll see y'all next time.
See you
Bye
next
bye.
time. Thank you.
Bye bye. Brandon, can I tell you real quick? We both need to put our shirts up, and then we probably need to take some type of screenshot picture of this one. Um,
I love it. I
so
love it.
you are currently wearing the dog father, and I've got the cat father.
That is perfect.
So I don't know if you can see, but mine has actually my cats on it.
Ah,
One's an orange dickhead, and one's a really spunky. I'm pretty sure he's like
is
a
that a one-eyed cat?
and he's a one-eyed. I'm pretty sure he's like part Maine Coon. So
Okay. This is Teddy the dog is where mine came from. So mine's a little more generic.
that's awesome. You know what's funny is that I wore this today to do some work at school, and I didn't even think about it until I got home, and I was like, "Oh, I got to put that Catfather shirt on for the pod." I'm like, "Oh, I'm already wearing it."